Welcome to Fiction Audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, like and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. If you have any recommendations for novels, comment below.
Please join my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/fictionaudiobook.
Chapter 428, CH 428, Strange Smell. Conan simply couldn't understand, had she really resigned herself to this fate? She was lost in thought for a long time, unable to comprehend how she could possibly accept such a thing. At first, when Hokage Conan came to find her, she had completely understood. She had always believed that when it came to emotions, she was someone who would never settle for less. But now, the person standing here, was this really still herself? She couldn't help but ask, did His Majesty do something to you? Has he looked for you in the past 2 days? Hokage Conan calmly shook her head and said, no, I have not been coerced. Conan found it even harder to understand. If that was the case, then there was even less reason for this. Hokage Conan looked at her and asked, what do you think would be the best future for me? Conan remained silent, as if deep in thought. Hokage Conan continued, living without worries, finding new hobbies and interests, making new close friends, and leading a comfortable and carefree life, isn't that what's best? Conan asked, is that not good? That kind of life indeed sounded nice. When Hokage Conan had first decided to stay here, these were exactly the things she had envisioned. Hokage Conan smiled faintly and said, it is good. And everything I just mentioned will likely come true in the future. The Emperor has given me a nice place to live, provides me with a generous sum of money every month, and even my housemates are kind people who will probably become good friends. Being with them, I can even learn to raise. It all sounded wonderful. Hokage Conan's current life was something that many would envy, she truly could start over here. And yet, something still felt off. Conan was silent for a moment before suddenly asking, and what about love? Don't you want to meet someone you truly like, someone you can love deeply again? She then realized that everything Hokage Conan had received came at a price, the price of her own body. Hokage Conan remained indifferent and countered with a question of her own, do you think I'll ever fall in love with someone again? Conan was stunned. It was only at this moment that she suddenly understood why she had never been able to empathize with the person standing before her. At the core of it, she simply couldn't see this person as truly herself. Everything that Hokage Conan had spoken about earlier was nothing more than a story, one that could evoke her sympathy and sorrow, but nothing deeper. Otherwise, someone like her, who had always been somewhat prideful when it came to emotions, would never have said something as naive as hoping the other person could meet someone they liked again. The other her had lived for nearly 20 years after Yihiko's death in that world. If she were capable of loving someone else, wouldn't she have done so long ago? Her heart had always belonged to her Yihiko. Hokage Conan spoke calmly, my Yihiko no longer exists. What the Emperor wants from me is meaningless in my eyes, there's nothing I can't give. I'll just treat it as an insignificant interlude in my life. Conan was left speechless. She couldn't agree with this mindset, yet she also felt powerless. She still believed that Hokage Conan had been forced to accept her circumstances. She asked, is this really what you want? Hokage Conan looked at the drink sitting on the table in front of her. After a moment, she picked it up and took a sip. As she savored it, she realized that the flavor was sweet and sour, pleasantly refreshing. Even if her current life wasn't exactly what she had wished for, at least she still had time, still had the energy to drink something like this. And before she came to this world, she said, there's no such thing as everything going exactly the way we want. It's just a matter of whether we can accept it or not. She looked at the Conan sitting across from her and continued, this life, I can accept it. Conan clenched her fists tightly, then slowly loosened them. She placed both hands on the table, lowering her head to stare at the untouched dishes in front of her. If the other her could accept it, why couldn't she? The person sitting before her, this her, was the self that Yihiko from another world had sacrificed his life to save. The self who had spent 20 years dedicated to fulfilling Yihiko's wishes. Even though her life in that other world had been full of suffering, hardships, and regrets, to Conan, this version of herself was perfect, noble, untarnished, and idealized. She couldn't accept the idea that such a her would one day unwillingly fall into the arms of another man. To her, that would be a betrayal of the bond between her and Yihiko, a betrayal of herself. Their perspectives were irreconcilable, yet Conan didn't know how to persuade her anymore. Because she had no better solution. If she urged her not to resign herself, not to become numb, wouldn't that only make things even more humiliating once the Emperor eventually forced her? The situation and outcome filled her with unbearable anger and sorrow. How had the Emperor become such a detestable person? Was he deliberately punishing them for the mistakes they had made in the past? But if this was meant to be punishment, then why couldn't he just take it out on them directly? Why did he have to torment the version of herself that had come from another world? Conan muttered under her breath, no. It shouldn't be like this. You shouldn't be like this. Konan. Suddenly, Konan grabbed Hokage Konan's hands, clutching them tightly. Her hands were a little cold, just like her entire demeanor and presence. A woman is like a mirror, you can see a man's love for her reflected in her. For so many years, her bond with Yihiko had been her source of strength, the deepest belief in her heart, and what had made her so powerful. Konan seemed unwilling to look any longer and lowered her head. Hokage Konan said, "Don't let me become an obsession for you. It took me so much effort to let go of everything, just let me truly start over." When they left the restaurant, the two parted ways. Konan's expression was somewhat dazed as she slowly walked forward, her gaze drifting toward the sky. The streets were bustling with people, full of noise and chatter, when suddenly, a voice snapped her out of her thoughts. Konan. Konan turned to look and saw that it was Pakura, whom she hadn't seen in a few days. Pakura. She was surprised. Today, Pakura was dressed in a more formal, somewhat androgynous outfit. Her presence was always strong, exuding an air of aggression. "What's with the outfit?" "Just got off work. His Majesty gave me a new position." Pakura smiled faintly. "Oh. Is that so? And in this new job, I'll get to meet your Yihiko." Pakura grinned. Huh. Konan was even more shocked. She knew what kind of work Yihiko did. He held a high position in the village, essentially serving as an administrative official within the empire. Meanwhile, Pakura was one of the 10 crown guards. There shouldn't have been much overlap between their duties. After a brief pause, she asked, "What job is it?" "Deputy Governor of the Fire Province," Pakura said casually. "Deputy Governor. That's amazing. Let's find a place to sit and talk." The two of them returned to the same izakaya Konan had just left. Pakura ordered some alcohol, but Konan wasn't in the mood to drink, so Pakura ordered her a few more dishes and a drink. Konan found the scene in front of her strangely familiar. "It's just a bunch of messes to clean up. His Majesty gave me this job because I used to be the Kazekage and had experience managing a village's affairs." Pakura took a sip of her drink and began to complain. Among the Empire's senior officials, there are very few ninjas. Most ninjas lack the necessary skills for this kind of work. Talent is scarce. I think Yihiko has a bright future ahead of him. Konan nodded lightly. I see. Yihiko indeed liked his current job and was passionate about it. Now that the world was at peace, he had new ambitions to pursue. What about you? Pakura suddenly asked. Me. Konan was taken aback. Pakura elaborated, are you interested in finding a job in this field? You were a high-ranking member of Omega Kure, weren't you? Konan simply smiled. I'll pass. I'm not really interested in this kind of work. Back in Omega Kure, she had handled many administrative tasks, but that was all to help ease Yihiko's burdens, for the sake of their shared dream. Now, she no longer needed to do such things. Pakura swirled her drink in her glass and said leisurely, power is a useful thing. With it, you can accomplish more and steer things in the direction you want. Konan's smile turned a little wry. She wasn't some naive girl, of course, she understood the meaning behind the words of this former Kazekage. Are you trying to tempt me? Pakura chuckled softly. Just expressing some thoughts. I originally thought that after the empire was established, I wouldn't be involved in these kinds of matters again. I never expected His Majesty to suddenly place me in such a high position. Konan said, that's because you have the capability, Pakura. You deserve the position. Pakura shook her head. There are many capable people. I was just lucky. Is that so? Konan tilted her head slightly. Pakura looked at Konan and suddenly smiled. In a way, we're quite similar. What do you mean? We both once received His Majesty's kindness when he was young. That's the connection we share. When His Majesty was still young, he had reached out to the Akatsuki organization in the Land of Rain, helping them thwart Hanzo the Salamander's schemes and allowing them to take control of Omega Kure. Likewise, in his younger days, he had helped Pakura rise to the position of Kazekage in Sunagakure. Even back then, I knew His Majesty wasn't an ordinary person, Pakura said, then chuckled. Of course, I never expected him to become this powerful. Even the legendary sage of the Six Paths, who founded the Rinne sect, couldn't compare to the present-day Sun Empire. His Majesty is a pioneer of this era. In my heart, no one can compare to him. Receiving his kindness back then was the greatest fortune of my life, and I hope to always remain by his side. As she spoke, her eyes shimmered with light, and she kept her gaze fixed on Konan. Konan felt a little uncomfortable under that gaze. She nodded in agreement, saying, His Majesty is indeed like a god. She truly used to think this way, holding the Emperor in awe and reverence. But after the past 2 days, her perspective had shifted. Even so, she couldn't deny his remarkable achievements. A sense of contradiction welled up in her heart. She was feeling dissatisfaction toward a man whom the entire world revered. The matter of the other Conan crept back into her mind, leaving her restless. She let out a long, melancholic sigh. What's wrong? Pakura asked from across the table. It's nothing. That drink is boring, Pakura remarked, nodding toward Conan's beverage before glancing at the bottle of alcohol on the table. After a moment of hesitation, Conan poured herself a drink. She downed it in one gulp. Her thoughts drifted back to the first time she met the Emperor, during the Third Great Ninja War. At the time, the weakened Konoha was struggling against the forces of Kimogakure and had come to Omegakure for aid. She had been surprised by the Emperor's young age, but the strength and determination he displayed had truly shocked her. His goodwill in those early years had earned their gratitude. As for everything that happened afterward, perhaps they had only themselves to blame. Looking at Pakura, Conan suddenly asked, "You and His Majesty, how are things?" Pakura casually replied, "I confess to him." Conan was taken aback. "Ah, really?" Pakura smiled. "I'm not the kind of person to keep my feelings hidden, unlike some people." Conan pressed on, and then. Pakura spoke lightly, "Nothing happened. His Majesty knows how I feel, but he didn't say much. He still treats me the same as before. Maybe. I'm just not his type." She sighed softly. Conan couldn't help but say, "How could that be?" "Pakura, you're beautiful, and you have such an elegant presence." Pakura chuckled knowingly. His Majesty isn't exactly lacking in beautiful women around him. Maybe I'm just not his preference. Conan fell silent. Pakura continued, "I really envy those women who have received His Majesty's favor. They are luckier than I am." Conan silently drank her wine, not responding. Pakura glanced at her, then suddenly smiled. "Conan. Huh. Let's say, just hypothetically, if His Majesty liked you, what would you do?" Conan's heart skipped a beat. Her hand, holding the wine cup, froze midair before she slowly put it down. Her gaze wandered aimlessly, and she muttered, "How would I know?" Pakura, still smiling, pressed on. "I'm seriously asking. Just imagine for a moment, if His Majesty liked you, what would you do?" Conan's heartbeat quickened again. She panicked slightly. "Why are you asking me this?" Pakura replied casually, "I've had my own fantasies, but in the end, they're just that, fantasies. If what you imagine is the same as what I do, then maybe what I feel is real." Conan hesitated. "There's no point in answering this. It's not like His Majesty would actually like me." Pakura chuckled. "Why do you keep avoiding my question? I'm just asking you to imagine. I don't want to think about it." Pakura studied Conan, who was lowering her head, and then leaned in, speaking in a soft, almost teasing voice. "Conan, haven't you ever thought that His Majesty is a very attractive man?" Conan was startled so badly that she almost dropped her cup. It wobbled violently in her hands. Pakura smirked. "No need to deny it so quickly. I know you love Yihiko, but that doesn't mean you can't have thoughts about other men. It's just a thought, it's not real. Just thinking about it doesn't count as betraying Yihiko." Conan kept her head down, remaining completely silent. Pakura chuckled and continued, amusement lacing her voice. "You know what May thinks about all the time. One time, when I was sleeping in the same room as her, I found a picture of His Majesty under her pillow, and it had a rather strange smell on it." Swish. Conan suddenly stood up, the chair behind her toppling over with a loud crash. The noise drew the attention of many in the izakaya, their gazes shifting toward her. A brief silence followed. Conan's expression flickered, shifting unpredictably. "I'm leaving." She turned around and quickly strode out of the izakaya. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tavet 300+ ch. Chapter 429, ch 429, I'm doing well. At this moment, Conan felt that what Pakura had said was an insult to her. She was someone who already had a loved one, how could she possibly have such disgusting thoughts about the Emperor? Just hearing those vulgar and indecent words filled her with disgust. Her emotions were in complete turmoil. She had already been feeling down because of what had happened to her counterpart from the other world, and now she was even more frustrated. She hurriedly walked out of the izakaya, striding quickly toward her home. Pakura was clearly a decent person, so why had she suddenly said something like that today? Did she really think Conan was someone who could joke about such things so casually? Then she thought about May. How could Pakura mock her like that? May had always kept her feelings for the Emperor hidden deep in her heart, never doing anything inappropriate in public. She had even been worried about her own situation and had reminded Conan to be cautious. In that moment, the image of these two friends in Conan's heart changed drastically. She returned home alone, but she didn't know what to do. She lay motionless on the sofa. It wasn't until evening that Yihiko and Nagato arrived. Seeing Konan lying there, they looked at each other in confusion. Konan. Konan barely lifted her head to look at them. Her gaze lingered on Yihiko for a few seconds before she said, I don't feel like cooking today. You two go eat outside. Yihiko and Nagato exchanged glances, then leaned in with concern. Konan, did something happen? Konan let out a long breath and said, It's nothing. I just don't feel like cooking. How could she possibly tell them about this? She could only keep it to herself and slowly digest it over time. They knew each other's personalities well. Normally, they wouldn't hide things from one another. But seeing that Konan didn't want to talk about it, Yihiko and Nagato didn't press further. I'll cook dinner with Nagato. If there's anything you want to eat, just let us know, Yihiko said with a cheerful smile. Konan pursed her lips and looked at the warm, bright smile on Yihiko's face, feeling a wave of warmth in her heart. But then, she thought, if only the Yihiko from the other world were still there as well. That way, she wouldn't have to suffer humiliation. Anything is fine. Just make whatever you like, she said before getting up and heading to her room. I'm going to change. She had been lying on the couch all afternoon, and her body felt uncomfortable. As Yihiko and Nagato busied themselves in the kitchen, Konan stayed in her room for a long time. When she finally came out, she had changed into more comfortable home clothes. Seeing the two of them bustling around the kitchen made her feel a little better. By dinner time, a bit of a smile had returned to her face. After the meal, as they were cleaning up, Nagato, sensing the mood, tactfully excused himself and left first. While washing the dishes, Konan suddenly said to Yihiko, over there. I mean, the other me, she's having a hard time adjusting to life here. If you have time, you should go check on her. Yihiko hesitated for a moment before asking, is your bad mood today related to her? Don't ask. I don't want to talk about it. Yihiko sighed and said, all right. I can go tomorrow. Should I go alone, or should we go together? Konan was silent for a moment before saying, go alone. I think, she really needs your support. There was a bit of selfishness in her decision. She hoped that the other version of herself, upon seeing Yihiko again, would rekindle her feelings for him, hoping that he could help her find strength in her heart once more. Yihiko nodded lightly but, after thinking for a moment, added, Konan, even though she's also you, she's not my feelings for her are just normal concern. Konan immediately shot him a sharp glance. Of course, I know that. What, do you want both of us or something? Yihiko laughed awkwardly and quickly promised, no way, I wouldn't even dare think about it. Konan fell into silence again before murmuring, she's really pitiful. Yihiko also grew silent, washing the plate in his hands without a word. After a long pause, he finally said, the future will get better. The future? Konan felt lost. Would the future really be better? She had no solution, and the thought of what was to come filled her heart with indescribable sorrow. The next day. After learning from Konan where the Hokage Konan lived, Yihiko prepared to visit her. For a moment, he considered bringing a gift, but then felt it would be too formal, so he decided to go empty-handed. He arrived at a quiet courtyard and noticed a lush tangerine tree growing by the fence. Beneath it, a tall woman was watering the plants. The woman had slightly tanned skin and wore revealing, alluring clothing that gave off a unique charm. Noticing Yihiko outside, she glanced at him, then smiled and said, you must be Lord Yihiko, correct? Yihiko was surprised. You know me. The woman chuckled. One of the Empire's chief ministers, I often see you in the newspapers. Yihiko returned a warm smile. I'm here to see Konan. The woman replied, please, come in. In the living room, there were 3 other women, one with orange hair, one with black hair, and Hokage Konan. Each of them was stunningly beautiful, leaving Yihiko momentarily dazzled. He hadn't expected Hokage Konan's housemates to be such breathtaking women and was also surprised at how she had ended up living with them. He quickly realized that this wasn't the best place for a private conversation. When Hokage Konan saw Yihiko, she froze for a moment before getting up from the sofa. Why are you here? Robin introduced him to Nami and Hancock. This is Lord Yihiko, one of the Empire's chief ministers. Nice to meet you, Yihiko nodded slightly, then turned to Hokage Konan. I heard that you've settled down here, so I came to check on you. Nami and Hancock exchanged glances, greeting him briefly before turning their attention back to Konan, curiosity flickering in their eyes. What's the relationship between Konan and this man? After a brief moment of thought, Hokage Konan said, let's go outside and talk. Yihiko agreed readily, as that was exactly what he had in mind. The two of them left the room together. As soon as the door closed, Nami flopped onto the sofa and eagerly asked, so, what's the deal between that guy and Konan? Robin chuckled. Who knows? Maybe they're just friends. Nami frowned. But isn't Conan from another world? How does she have friends here? Robin replied, not sure. Hancock furrowed her brows. This doesn't seem so simple. Isn't Conan one of His Majesty's people? Why is she involved with another man? Robin sighed and, instead of answering, left the room to continue tending to the artwork she was nurturing. Meanwhile, after leaving the house, Hokage Conan and Yihiko found a quiet restaurant nearby and sat down. How do you feel about your new environment? Yihiko was the first to speak after they settled in. It's fine. Everyone is nice, Hokage Conan replied calmly. At this moment, she no longer felt the overwhelming emotions she had when she first saw him. That's good to hear, Yihiko said. As he looked at Hokage Conan, whose demeanor was completely different from the one in his memories, he suddenly felt a strange sense of dissonance. This person, was she really Conan to him? Was he facing his Conan, or just a stranger? A strange awkwardness crept up on him, and he said, I wanted to come sooner, but work kept me busy, so I was delayed until now. Hokage Conan seemed to catch on to something. Her eyes flickered slightly, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. There was no need to come all this way. You should focus on your work. You don't have to do anything for me, I came here to live on my own. She knew that he had only come because the Conan from this world had urged him to, or at least given her approval. Otherwise, Yihiko would have had too many reservations to make this visit. The Conan from this world. She was probably like that, a person who had always idealized love. To shift the conversation, she asked, Robin mentioned earlier that you're a chief minister of the empire. Yihiko smiled. Ah, yes. His Majesty values me and gave me this opportunity. Chief minister, just from the title, it was clear it was a high-ranking position. Hokage Conan gave a small, knowing smile. You seem to enjoy this role a lot. Yihiko paused for a moment before replying, everything I once dreamed of has been realized by His Majesty. In the nation he built, my ideals have been extended. I hope I can accomplish something meaningful. Ideals, huh? Hokage Conan felt a pang of melancholy. She thought back to the Akatsuki of the past. Back then, everyone had come together because they shared the same beliefs. They had followed Yihiko in an attempt to save Omegakure. But the Akatsuki that came later had changed completely. Hokage Conan said, I believe you'll achieve it. Yihiko smiled. Thank you. Hokage Conan smiled again. Because you have people by your side who firmly support you. Yihiko was momentarily stunned before replying, I know. I've always known. He turned to ask, what about you? Have you thought about what you want to do? Hokage Conan said, I don't have any specific plans for now. I just feel that my current daily life is quite nice, cooking, watering plants, watching TV, strolling around the city. She listed her daily routine in a soft, tranquil voice. Yihiko could sense a unique serenity and warmth beneath her cool exterior. This kind of life is something I never experienced in the past 20 years. I want to take my time and savor it. Congratulations, Yihiko blurted out after a moment of daze. Hokage Conan was a bit surprised, then chuckled softly. She rarely smiled, and only in front of this person would she do so. Yes, I suppose congratulations are in order. Congratulations to me, for gaining a new life. Yihiko sighed. Before coming here, I was worried that you might not be able to adjust to this new life. Hokage Conan said, the sudden shift to a slow-paced life was a bit unfamiliar at first, but it's not something I can't accept. In fact, I'm looking forward to the days ahead. The two of them talked about many things. Yihiko shared his future plans and details about his work, while Hokage Conan quietly listened and even offered some insightful suggestions. Talking to her gave him the same sense of understanding that he felt with his Conan. She was also Conan, but she was in her 30s, carrying a maturity and wisdom that his Conan did not yet possess. It was, undeniably attractive. As soon as that thought surfaced, Yihiko quickly pushed it away. He already had his Conan. And this woman, she was probably only opening up to him because he looked like someone she once cared for. He shouldn't entertain inappropriate thoughts or taint the emotions between them. Yihiko remained composed. As they parted, he told Hokage Conan that if she ever needed anything in Konoha, she could come to him. As a chief minister, his words carried weight in many situations. Hokage Conan smiled as she bid him farewell. She watched his figure disappear into the crowd before the smile on her face gradually faded. Yihiko left with a feeling of relief. He believed that this Conan would have a good life in this world, just as he believed in his own future. He had to work even harder to realize his dreams and ambitions. Hokage Conan stood still amidst the bustling street for a long time before finally leaving. Her emotions were complicated. She understood the goodwill Yihiko had shown when he came to see her, but that goodwill stemmed from the fact that they shared part of the same past, making him feel a certain sense of responsibility. She, too, harbored goodwill toward them. She simply didn't want them to be entangled in her troubles anymore. There was already another version of herself in this world, living the life she had once longed for. That alone was enough for Hokage Konan. She was content to remain a mere observer. Besides, her current life wasn't so bad. When she returned home, she happened to run into Samui, who was just heading out. She greeted her politely. Samui didn't say much, she simply returned the greeting before leaving. Robin had finished watering the plants and was now reading a magazine in the living room. Conan's back, Nami said with a playful smile upon seeing her. Yeah. What did you and your friend talk about? Nami asked, eyes filled with curiosity. Just some everyday things. We haven't seen each other in a long time, Conan replied. Nami leaned over the sofa, resting her chin on her hand with a mischievous grin. Really? It didn't seem that simple to me. You're overthinking it. Hokage Conan's gaze shifted to Hancock, who had changed outfits and was admiring herself in front of a full-length mirror. Miss Hancock, are you going out? She asked. No, Robin answered for her. His Majesty is coming tonight. She's deciding what to wear. His Majesty. Hokage Conan's expression stiffened. Robin glanced at her before returning to her magazine. Don't worry, His Majesty won't be staying the night. You can rest early if you'd like. Hokage Conan looked at the three women again. Robin remained leisurely engrossed in her magazine, Nami continued watching TV as if nothing was out of the ordinary, and Hancock seemed rather expectant about the evening's events. Her heart was suddenly filled with an inexplicable sense of nervousness and unease. The calmness and tranquility she had displayed earlier when facing Yihiko instantly vanished, though she did not let it show on her face. His Majesty coming here was completely different from when they were summoned to Miss Samui's place. If something were to happen tonight. She silently clenched her fists, Yihiko's smiling face from earlier flashing through her mind, but in the end, she let go powerlessly. I'm going back to my room, she said. Robin and Nami watched as Hokage Conan walked back to her bedroom without saying anything. After all, they had once experienced these same emotions. With time, she would eventually change too. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tave at 300+ ch. Chapter 430, ch 430, Unless You Take Her Place. Yihiko went back to see Conan and told her that he had already visited Hokage Conan. She seems to be doing well and even has some enthusiasm for the future, Yihiko said in a soft voice. He then briefly recounted his conversation with Hokage Conan. Conan fell into silence after hearing this and then asked, was she like that with you as well? Yihiko was puzzled. Why? Is something wrong? Nothing. Conan didn't want to say more. There were some things she really didn't know how to bring up with Yihiko. After thinking about it, she still felt it was best not to let him know. Yihiko. Yeah. If, one day, His Majesty suddenly decided to do something you didn't want to see happen, what would you do? Yihiko was stunned by the question. He looked at Conan, realizing that she wouldn't ask such a thing for no reason. Conan, did something happen with His Majesty? Just answer my question first. Yihiko frowned. The answer to such a question was obvious. Was there anyone in this world who could go against His Majesty's will? Have you forgotten what happened to those who once opposed His Majesty? They were only spared from a worse fate because of His Majesty's mercy. Yihiko looked at Conan seriously and suddenly asked, Conan, you've been acting strange lately. Tell me what's really going on. Conan. Seeing Yihiko's firm attitude, Conan realized she could no longer brush it off, but she still didn't want to tell him the truth. After a quick thought, she came up with an excuse. It's about the other me, the issue of whether she should stay or leave. His Majesty wants her to leave this place and return to her original world. Yihiko immediately believed her and couldn't help but say, that world wasn't good for her, was it? Isn't there nothing left for her there? Conan lowered her head and murmured, yeah, I think so too. Yihiko frowned in deep thought. After meeting the other Conan today, was everything she told him just a lie? Was she only saying those things to keep him from worrying? But since it was His Majesty's decision, he couldn't help but clench his fists. After a long silence, he said, I will go and plead with His Majesty. Conan quickly said, don't go. At this moment, she felt a bit flustered and confused. She didn't even know why she had come up with such an absurd excuse or why she had spoken so thoughtlessly. Why did she even ask Yihiko that kind of question in the first place? I mean, this is His Majesty's decision. It's best not to interfere. Yihiko's brows furrowed. Conan, do you realize what you're saying? Conan also realized how cold and heartless her words sounded, leaving her at a loss for how to respond. Yihiko said, "Didn't Lady Tsunade set a precedent? I believe the Emperor can be persuaded." Lady Tsunade. Conan thought about the relationship between Tsunade and His Majesty. It seemed a little strange, didn't it? Originally, Tsunade had even worked as His Majesty's assistant. But that wasn't something she could say out loud. Conan took a deep breath and said, "I already have a solution. You shouldn't get involved in this. You've earned His Majesty's trust, and if you do something that goes against his will, it won't end well for you." Yihiko looked at her suspiciously. "Really? What solution?" "I told you, don't ask. I'll handle it smoothly." Yihiko felt that Conan's behavior was strange, but he couldn't figure out what she was really thinking. Feeling helpless, he could only sigh and say, "All right, Conan. But if there's ever something you can't handle, promise me you'll let me know." Not long after Yihiko left, Pakura came to visit. Conan looked at Pakura standing outside the door and felt a bit uncomfortable. She recalled what Pakura had said that night when they drank together, unsure whether it was just drunken rambling. But since they were still friends, Conan forced a smile and said, "Pakura, is there something you need?" "Yihiko and Nagato have left, right?" Pakura asked with a smile. "I've prepared some food and drinks at my place. I'd like to invite you over for a bit. But I just had dinner. The things I said that night while drinking weren't very pleasant. I want to apologize to you and hope you'll do me the honor of coming over," Pakura said with a bright smile. Hearing this, Conan felt much better, and her smile became more genuine. "I didn't take that night's conversation to heart, so you don't have to worry about it." Pakura chuckled. "The food is already set on the table." Conan thought for a moment and said, "Let's invite May along too." "No need. There are some things I want to talk to you about alone." Conan found it a bit strange but still followed Pakura upstairs. Pakura's place was just above the apartment she shared with May, not far at all, which was why they often visited each other. Pakura lived alone, but her home had a very different style from May's. The decor was more refined, and there was even a liquor cabinet beside the fridge stocked with various types of alcohol. On the dining table, there were a few dishes and a bottle of wine. Conan had just eaten and didn't have much appetite, but she could still drink a little. "I heard about your situation," Pakura said bluntly after they sat down. "I mean, about the other you." Conan hesitated. "Did May tell you?" Pakura smiled lightly. "No need to ask about that, I already know." Conan remained silent. The matter that had been troubling and weighing on her mind was brought up once again, so she simply drank her wine without a word. Pakura continued, "I think you really don't need to be so worried. Being noticed by His Majesty is a good thing." Conan lifted her gaze to glance at Pakura before lowering her head again, muttering, "I'm not like you. We don't see this as a good thing." Pakura didn't argue with her and instead smiled. "Are you planning to go against His Majesty's will?" That was exactly what Yihiko had implied earlier. Conan's grip on the wine glass suddenly tightened. She couldn't help but question, just because he wants something, does it have to happen? Just because he desires it, does that mean he can ignore other people's will? Pakura shrugged. "That's just how this world works. His Majesty stands at the very pinnacle of it. Everything we have now, all the comfort we enjoy, was granted by him. It was His Majesty who brought order to this chaotic world, only because of him can we sit here now, drinking and chatting like this." Conan remained silent. She knew the Emperor had achieved great feats, but she still couldn't accept the unfair fate that had befallen the other version of herself. Pakura said, "His Majesty likes women, that's something everyone knows. Who would dare speak against it? If one can serve His Majesty well, they can obtain everything they desire. Conan, you need to face reality." Conan bit her lip tightly. Pakura continued, "You're so unwilling to let the other you be taken by His Majesty, unless..." Conan looked at her. "Unless what?" Pakura grinned. "Unless you take her place." Upon hearing this, Conan's heart trembled violently. Hokage Conan lay down early, repeatedly convincing herself to accept everything as it was, just as she had comforted the other version of herself and Yihiko. But now, faced with the reality of the situation, she couldn't suppress her growing panic. The bedroom lights had been turned off early, the curtains drawn tightly shut. She lay under the blanket, only half of her head peeking out, hoping to fall asleep and wake up to a new day. Yet, she could hear everything happening in the living room, Robin, Nami, and Hancock taking turns showering before chatting casually. The room's soundproofing should have been decent, but for some reason, Hokage Conan's senses felt unusually sharp tonight. After lying there for a while, still unable to sleep, she reluctantly sat up. The laughter in the living room continued, sounding almost cheerful. Were they happy because the Emperor was coming? Hokage Conan turned on her bedside lamp and picked up a book. She had always thought highly of Robin, an intelligent and mature woman. But why would someone like her accept this kind of life? Or was it precisely because of her wisdom that she believed submission was the right choice? That was what Hokage Konan had been telling herself too. If she treated the Emperor's affairs as nothing more than an insignificant episode in her life, then everything would be fine. But thoughts were just thoughts. When it came time to truly act, it wasn't that simple. She had never truly convinced herself, she had only been lying to herself. Suddenly, the laughter and conversation outside fell silent, followed by a synchronized greeting. Your Majesty. The words sent a tremor through Hokage Konan's heart. She could no longer focus on her book. Sitting on the bed, she found herself at a complete loss. Placing the book aside, she pulled the blanket over herself once more, yet her ears remained sharply attuned to the sounds outside. The people in the living room were speaking, but their voices were too low to make out clearly. She simply noticed that after the Emperor arrived, the atmosphere between Robin and the others was no longer as lighthearted and carefree. Gradually, the living room seemed to quiet down. After a few minutes, strange sounds began to echo through the air. Hokage Konan instantly realized what was happening. Under the covers, her face felt hot, perhaps from being stifled, or perhaps from something else. Amid this inexplicable shyness, she also felt a growing fear that her bedroom door would suddenly burst open, fear that they would force her to join in. Carrying these worries, Hokage Konan endured the torment for nearly 2 hours. Eventually, the noises outside subsided, and she heard Robin's voice. Your Majesty, take care. The Emperor had left. Konan, who had been on edge the entire time, finally relaxed. Almost immediately, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. She could rest easy, for now. In the living room, Nami lay sprawled on the couch, groaning, I'm exhausted. I can't move. He really knows how to wear people out. Hancock had already dressed and said, this Empress is a little hungry. Nami turned to her, teasing, what, didn't get your fill just now? Hancock responded matter-of-factly, how could that possibly be filling? Robin let out a long breath and said, I'm hungry too, but I don't feel like cooking. Why don't we go out to eat? Some restaurants should still be open at this hour. Nami lazily asked, can you bring me back something? Robin glanced at her. By the time we get back, you'll probably be asleep. Realizing she had a point, Nami reluctantly sat up and started dressing. The three women then left together. The Emperor didn't come here often, perhaps only once a week. Occasionally, when he was in the mood, he would summon them to Samui's place instead. The rest of the time belonged to them. They had already gotten used to this. Hokage Konan didn't fall asleep right away. Instead, she waited until they had left before stepping out of her bedroom. The living room was in complete disarray. A strange scent lingered in the air, and clothes were strewn across the floor. She picked up a piece of clothing and took a quick look, only to realize it was a torn pair of stockings. Hurriedly, she threw it away. She briefly scanned the room. Robin and the others hadn't cleaned up before leaving. If she were to tidy up now, it might make them overthink things. Recalling the sounds she had heard from her bedroom earlier, her face heated up again. She quickly turned around and hurried back into her room. Meanwhile, after leaving the house, Robin, Nami, and Hancock headed straight for the new district. Their home was in the old district, a quiet and remote area with little nightlife. By now, it was already past 10 p.m., and most people had gone to bed. In contrast, the new district was bustling with activity. The three of them entered an izakaya together. Their tall, strikingly beautiful figures immediately drew the attention of the entire establishment. Fortunately, Konoha's security was excellent. Even in a place filled with drunken patrons, no one dared to cause trouble. Hancock cupped her hands over her mouth and exhaled before carefully sniffing the air. Her brows furrowed slightly, and she took another whiff of her own scent. What are you smelling? Nami asked with a playful smile. Robin shot Nami a knowing glance, she was clearly asking just to tease. Suddenly, Nami stood up and leaned toward Robin, deliberately exhaling right in her face. A strong scent hit Robin immediately, making her instinctively lean back. She shot Nami a glare. Hancock ordered some staple dishes and side dishes, along with a bottle of sake. The izakaya was brightly lit, and the air was filled with the clinking of glasses and lively conversations. Some customers, caught up in the excitement, stood up and sang around their tables while others cheered them on. The atmosphere was vibrant and full of energy. They look so happy, Nami said with a chuckle as she watched the group singing folk songs. Her thoughts drifted back to the days of sailing aboard the Mary. This place is meant for enjoyment, Robin remarked, glancing at the drinks that had just been served. I thought His Majesty would have had Konan join in today, Nami said, quickly shifting the topic rather than dwelling on nostalgia. Robin pondered for a moment before saying, His Majesty doesn't lack women. In my opinion, having so many isn't just about physical desire. Nami asked, then what is it about? The three of them were all considered beauties, as were the three women in Samui's house. And at the palace, His Majesty had 5 wives. Robin's expression turned thoughtful, her gaze flickering slightly before she quickly brushed it off with a smile. Never mind. Forget I said anything. Nami tilted her head and pouted. You're being so secretive. Robin simply chuckled, while Hancock remained focused on her meal. Do you think next time His Majesty visits, he'll call Conan to join in? Nami asked again. You seem very interested in this, Robin noted. Nami replied, I just think Conan has a unique aura. I'm curious to see what she'd be like in that situation. Hancock, who had been quietly eating, suddenly looked up and said, she'll be just like Robin. Robin's lips twitched slightly, while Nami burst into laughter, clutching her stomach. Now I'm even more curious. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tevat 300+ ch. Chapter 431, ch 431, God of Death. The Palace Front Hall Pavilion. Shursue stood before Makoto, reporting on his mission. The investigation of the Soul Society has reached the present world. The Shinigami responsible for the investigation has already been dealt with. So soon? Makoto said with slight surprise. Shursue explained, Head Captain Kairaku has been personally overseeing this matter, making it difficult for our people to interfere, so the process has been relatively swift. The issue Shursue referred to was the previous Soul Society upheaval, which stemmed from Makoto's agents introducing artificial devil fruits into the Soul Society. Now, with many devil fruit users in this world, the Soul Society's Shinigami, if they conducted a thorough investigation, could trace those creatures back to their connection with the living world. And the living world was entirely under the control of the Sun Empire. Sooner or later, the Soul Society would suspect the Empire's involvement. Makoto pondered for a moment and said, if that's the case, proceed with the second phase. Go find Big Mom and send her there this time. Shursue voiced some concerns, the Soul Society has significantly strengthened its security. Will this operation succeed as smoothly as the last? Makoto replied calmly, no matter how strong their security is, it can only guard against external threats. How will they defend against an enemy from within? The Solarite Tower stood tall above all of Siriidii. If Makoto wished, he could launch an all-out assault to obliterate Siriidii entirely. However, this world still required some forces to maintain the balance of reincarnation. As long as he controlled Siriidii from the shadows, that would be enough. 1st Division Barracks, Siriidii, Soul Society. They've lost contact. As the newly appointed head captain, Kairaku Shunsue looked surprised upon hearing Ise Nanao's report. The 3 squad members who went to the living world lost contact at the exact same time, Ise Nanao stated. Kairaku was stunned for a moment before asking, was there any hollow Ryatsu detected at the scene? No. 3 Shinigami had suddenly disappeared in the living world, yet it wasn't the work of hollows. So, who was behind this? The current world was no longer the same as before. Everything in the living world was under the control of one person, the Emperor of the Sun Empire. Evidently, Nanao was also aware of this. Her expression was grave as she answered Kairaku's question. Kairaku found his own thoughts dangerously unsettling. In fact, a chill ran down his spine. There was no solid evidence to confirm his suspicions, something he was secretly relieved about. But if the previous upheaval had truly been orchestrated by the Empire, the image of the Sun Empire's emperor flashed through Kairaku's mind. Under the weight of his own thoughts, that young face suddenly seemed far more terrifying. Taking a deep breath, he wrestled with his swirling thoughts before saying, we can't let the trail go cold. Send Captain Hitsugaya and Captain Komamura to investigate together. Just then, hurried footsteps approached from outside. A squad member knelt at the entrance. Head Captain, the Tsuneyashiro clan has sent an invitation. Nanao handed the invitation to Kairaku, who glanced over its contents. The Tsuneyashiro clan, one of the 4 great noble families of Soul Society and overseers of the Grand Spirit Book Gallery, had invited him to a banquet at their estate. The invitation also listed the other guests who had been invited. Each name belonged to a noble of Soul Society, including a significant number of Central 46 members. Captain. Ise Nanao noticed that Kairaku's grip on the letter was so tight that the veins on his hand were bulging. Kairaku's gaze turned ice-cold as he slowly uttered a command, pass the order, form ranks. During the previous upheaval, every individual in Siriidii who had transformed into a monster had one thing in common, they had all attended a banquet hosted by the Kuchiki clan shortly before the incident. Something had definitely happened at that banquet. But in the wake of that disaster, aside from Kuchiki Byakuya, who had been imprisoned after turning into a monster, and Kuchiki Rukia, who was under house arrest, the rest of the Kuchiki clan had been completely massacred. The Emperor of the living world had slaughtered every last one of the monsters and erased all traces of what had occurred. And now, just as they had begun investigating the living world, the Tsuneyashiro clan was pulling the same trick once again. How could Kairaku not be furious? He had to find out what was truly happening behind the scenes. At the head captain's command, the first division swiftly assembled. Kairaku chose to set off at the precise time when the banquet was about to begin, heading toward the Tsuneyashiro estate. Since the Tsuneyashiro clan was part of Soul Society's aristocracy and Siriidii itself was ultimately governed from the shadows by these noble families, Kairaku couldn't act too overtly. He refrained from issuing direct orders but instructed the Shinigami to conduct frequent patrols around the Tsuneyashiro estate under the guise of a training exercise. As for himself, he entered the estate accompanied by Ise Nanao. Neither of them had changed their attire. His white captain's haori was draped over his signature pink kimono, while Ise Nanao wore her usual black shihakusho. By the time they arrived, all the guests had already gathered. They were all nobles of Siriidii, most of them familiar faces to the two Shinigami. Kairaku's gaze swept over the attendees. The number of guests was nearly identical to that of the Kachiki clan's banquet, with seating arranged in both the outer and inner courtyards. He proceeded deeper into the estate until he reached the innermost courtyard. Only the Tsuneyashiro clan, the Shihoin clan, and members of Central 46 had the privilege of being seated here. But what shocked him the most was that the one seated in the position of honor was not Tsuneyashiro Tokinata, the current head of the Tsuneyashiro clan. Your Majesty, the Emperor, he couldn't help but exclaim. The men seated at the head of the table had eyes as radiant as white whole stars. With a gentle smile, he looked at Kairaku and said, "I trust you've been well, Head Captain Kairaku." Kairaku immediately steadied himself, casting a subtle glance around the room. He confirmed that everyone present was a member of Central 46, and the Emperor had brought only one escort. Uchiha Shursue, one of the 10 Imperial Guards. He recognized him. "Why is your Majesty here?" Kairaku couldn't help but ask. "Oh. Am I not allowed to be?" The Emperor of the living world, Hyuga Makoto, responded with a light-hearted smile. Kairaku had too many questions, and an instinctive unease gnawed at his mind. "If your Majesty was planning to visit, a prior notice would have been appreciated so that we could properly prepare to welcome you," Kairaku said. The Shinigami maintained a liaison office in Konoha that handled communications between the two realms and kept records of those traveling between them. For the Emperor to appear in Soul Society unannounced could technically be considered an unauthorized intrusion. However, Kairaku couldn't possibly use that as a justification to question the Emperor. At that moment, Tsuneyashiro Tokinata, head of the Tsuneyashiro clan, stepped forward and addressed Kairaku Shunsue. "His Majesty is also my guest. Please, Head Captain, take your seat." Suppressing his unease, Kairaku Shunsue complied, seating himself to the right of the head position. As the host, Tsuneyashiro Tokinata sat to the Emperor's left. Kairaku glanced at Shursue, who remained standing beside the Emperor without taking a seat. The growing sense of dread within him deepened. He subtly signaled to Ise Nanao, who immediately understood and rose to leave the hall. Makoto paid no attention to Kairaku's little maneuver, but Shursue watched as Ise Nanao departed. His dark pupils suddenly revealed the distinct pattern of 3 tomo. "I imagine Head Captain Kairaku must have had quite a few concerns before coming here," Makoto said. Kairaku Shuinsue's thoughts raced. He countered, "And does your Majesty know what I am thinking?" Makoto smiled. "Before coming here, you were probably thinking that this banquet was suspicious. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stationed so many Shinigami around the Tsuneyashiro estate." Kairaku's expression darkened slightly. And then he suddenly realized something: the entire gathering, these nobles of Siriidii, the members of Central 46, the so-called great figures who governed the city, every single one of them was looking at him. His heart skipped a beat as an unsettling realization dawned upon him. At that moment, Makoto suddenly spoke again. "In truth, Head Captain Yamamoto is not dead." "What did you say?" Kairaku's eyes widened in shock. Startled, he nearly leaped from his seat. Makoto gazed at him with deep, quiet eyes. "Would you like to see your teacher?" Kairaku did not respond. He averted his gaze from the Emperor, his mind both alert and wary, then turned toward Tsuneyashiro Tokinata. "Lord Tokinata, this banquet." Before he could finish, Tokinata cut him off. "Head Captain, His Majesty is a benefactor and honored guest of Soul Society." Tokinata stared at him expressionlessly. "How could you show such disrespect to His Majesty?" As soon as he finished speaking, Kairaku was struck by shock. Right before his eyes, Tsuneyashiro Tokinata's entire body began to distort. Something beneath his flesh and skin writhed violently, and in moments, his elegant robes were torn apart as his form expanded, transforming into a towering, 3-meter-tall black-furred beast. In that instant, an image flashed through Kairaku's mind: Kochiki Byakuya, twisted into a monster. With the beast's thunderous roar, all the guests around them also began to change, one by one, turning into grotesque creatures. There was no time to react. Kairaku turned toward the entrance, only to hear more furious roars and howls echoing from outside. Nanao. Head Captain Kairaku. The Emperor's voice suddenly rang out beside him. Shall I send you to see Head Captain Yamamoto? Kairaku's hand gripped the hilt of his sword, his expression dark and grim. He gritted his teeth and growled, "You were the mastermind all along, weren't you?" Makoto sat cross-legged at the head of the table, resting his chin on one hand. Before coming here, hadn't you already guessed as much? Kairaku clenched his grip on his sword. He thought of the horrors of the last Soul Society uprising, of his revered teacher, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni. Everything, every tragedy, had been orchestrated by this man. And yet, he had once regarded him as Soul Society's benefactor. Overwhelmed by grief and hatred, yet drowning in helplessness, Kairaku couldn't help but ask, why? All of Soul Society, every Shinigami, now sees you as their benefactor. The ninja and the Shinigami could have coexisted in peace. Makoto remained indifferent as he looked at Kairaku. You've lived for over 1,000 years and still don't understand. Why? Because I am stronger than you. As he finished speaking, Makoto casually lifted one hand. In an instant, countless swirling voids erupted in all directions around Kairaku, torn rifts of chaotic space, ready to consume everything. Kairaku was utterly shocked. He dared not hesitate for even a moment and instantly drew his sword. Bankai. Heaven. Before he could finish, the spatial rifts contracted at an incredible speed, leaving him no room to react. There was no escape, no way to evade. In an instant, he was swallowed whole. Within the inner courtyard of the Tsuneyashiro estate, countless monstrous figures stood in eerie silence, awaiting the Emperor's command. Makoto glanced toward the distant sky, where the towering Solarite Tower loomed high above. With a slow, deliberate tone, he murmured, "Let the banquet begin." Darkness. Endless and boundless. Kairaku suddenly realized that he was trapped in an unfamiliar space. There was nothing here, no sense of direction, no passage of time. He gathered his spiritual pressure and released a beam of light. But as his gaze followed its path into the distance, it illuminated nothing. Am I imprisoned? Kairaku recalled the Emperor's words. Could it be that his teacher suffered the same fate? He was still perplexed. How had the monster feat Kuchiki Byakuya managed to kill his teacher? He had personally tested that creature's strength, and it was nowhere near powerful enough to threaten Old Man Yamamoto. Now that he himself was imprisoned, what was happening in Siriidi? He finally grasped the Emperor's scheme: eliminate Yamamoto first, and now take him out as well. Just like before, the Emperor was likely planning to stage another grand act, portraying himself as Soul Society's great hero, all while tightening his grip on the Shinigami. At this point, there might be no one left in the Godai 13 capable of stopping him. The Emperor's power was unfathomable. Even if Kairaku somehow managed to escape, he knew he stood no chance of defeating him. But that didn't mean he would simply give up. He was still the head captain of the Godai 13, he had to find a way out. Taking a deep breath, he pushed his power to its peak. His Ryatsu might not compare to Yamamoto's, but it was still a force to be reckoned with. When one's Ryuryoku reached an overwhelming level, it affected everything around them, one of the very reasons why Ryatsu had to be suppressed in Siriidi. Choosing a direction at random, he launched himself forward at high speed through the endless void. He had no idea how long he had been flying, time barely seemed to exist in this place, and his patience was wearing thin. Then, all of a sudden, a flicker of firelight appeared in the distance. Kairaku's heart tensed at first, but soon, he felt a familiar Ryatsu, and his expression lit up with joy. Because this Ryatsu belonged to his teacher, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni. Is that you, Shunsue? A voice called out from the distance. Kairaku rushed forward even faster. As he approached the firelight, he realized that his teacher wasn't alone, there were many others, some with vaguely familiar faces. At the forefront stood a figure holding a flame in his palm, the very source of the firelight. Hide your Ryatsu, now. This was the first thing Yamamoto said upon seeing Kairaku. Kairaku didn't understand why, but he instinctively obeyed and suppressed his Ryatsu. It was only then that he noticed, none of the people here were emitting any Ryatsu. By the dim firelight, he scanned the gathering, and what he saw shocked him even further. Urahara Kasuke, Shihoin Yoruchi, Hirako Shinji, all branded as criminals over a century ago. Ichibi Hayasube, Kirinji Tenjiro, members of the Royal Guard. And even Kurosaki Ishin, the long-missing former captain. Just as Kairaku was still trying to process all this, a sudden piercing shriek echoed through the endless darkness. The expressions of Yamamoto and the others instantly changed. We were still too slow. It's found us. Ichibe's voice was heavy. It. Kairaku looked at his teacher and the others, unable to contain his question. Yamamoto cast him a grave look, his eyes filled with an unprecedented weight. It calls itself a Shinigami. The God of Death. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tave at 300+ ch. Chapter 432, ch 432, The Demon That Devours Everything. The Soul Society faced another catastrophe. The Siriitii had yet to recover from the previous disaster, and this time, the chances of making it through were even slimmer. After sealing Kairaku Shunsui into the dimensional space, Makoto returned to the living world. Just like before, at a time when the Soul Society was in dire straits, their head captain had suddenly disappeared. All Makoto needed to do now was wait for the Soul Society's plea for aid within the next 2 days. After Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni, there was Kairaku Shunsui. But after Kairaku Shunsui, who would be next? As Makoto waited patiently, Yihiko suddenly approached him, looking troubled and hesitant, his words evasive and indirect. Makoto had kept Yihiko in a high-ranking position within the Empire because his abilities were useful. When dealing with outsiders, Yihiko had developed the presence and authority of a true leader. But in front of the Emperor, all of that crumbled away. What is it? Speak. Makoto interrupted impatiently, cutting short Yihiko's rambling. Only then did Yihiko hesitantly begin, Your Majesty, this is about Konan from the other world. What about her? Makoto's gaze locked onto him. Yihiko immediately felt an overwhelming pressure. I humbly request that Your Majesty allow Konan to remain in this world. Makoto raised an eyebrow. Do I need you to tell me what to do? Yihiko instantly knelt down, pleading, the other world is in turmoil, and Konan has suffered a harsh life since childhood. This world, however, is peaceful and stable, all thanks to Your Majesty. I beg Your Majesty to show mercy and grant her the opportunity to live under the glory of your rule. With Lady Tsunade as a precedent, this should not be difficult for Your Majesty, right? The person seated there remained silent for a while. Yihiko dared not raise his head and simply waited. After a long pause, he finally heard the other party speak. Where did you hear this from? Yihiko responded by bowing deeply, saying nothing. Seeing this, Makoto picked up a communication device from the table and connected to the Solaridity Tower. Go to Boa Hancock's residence and bring Konan to me. Then, turning to the kneeling Yihiko, he said, You may leave. Yihiko bowed low in gratitude. Thank you, Your Majesty. Your Majesty is most generous. Makoto replied indifferently, Did I say I agreed? Yihiko immediately tensed up but still insisted, Your Majesty is most generous. Makoto waved his hand, dismissing him. Only then did Yihiko leave. Makoto himself wasn't sure why Yihiko was so desperate to plead for Hokage Konan to stay. When had he ever said he was going to send her away? What exactly was Yihiko up to? About 10 minutes later, Hokage Konan appeared in Makoto's office. Your Majesty. She stood there, visibly tense. That night at home, the things that had happened, the sounds she had heard from her bedroom, she still remembered them vividly. It had left a lasting shock on her. Robin and Nami, whom she had initially thought well of, had actually. Every time she recalled it, she couldn't help but feel her face heat up. Yihiko came to see me just now, Makoto said directly, getting straight to the point. Hokage Konan's expression froze for a moment before her heart suddenly clenched. Yihiko. He came to plead with me, about you, Makoto continued. Hokage Konan immediately felt a wave of panic. She had already spoken with Yihiko before, trying to reassure him that her current life was fine, that he didn't need to worry. But before that, she had met with the version of herself from this world. At that time, she hadn't had any deeper thoughts, she was merely wondering if her other self could offer some advice. Had Yihiko learned about her current situation through this world's version of herself? Makoto had been observing Hokage Konan's changing expressions all along. He spoke calmly, Yihiko is a very capable person. I had high hopes for him before, thinking he could serve the Empire well. Hearing his tone, Hokage Konan's face turned pale. She couldn't help but plead, Your Majesty, this has nothing to do with Yihiko. Please, don't hold him accountable. Accountable for what? Makoto asked indifferently, his eyes as still as an ancient well, revealing neither joy nor anger. You all seem to think you know exactly what I intend to do. You're all so certain about my actions, aren't you? Hokage Konan didn't fully understand what the Emperor meant by those words, but she instinctively felt that he was angry. This Emperor had set his sights on her, and yet Yihiko had come to plead on her behalf. She bit her lip hard, this was the last thing she wanted to see happen. In her original world, Yihiko had willingly given up his life to save her. Was he now going to have his future ruined in this world because of her as well? No. It shouldn't be like this. She took a deep breath before bowing deeply toward Makoto. Your Majesty. I beg you to forgive Yihiko. Feeling that this alone wasn't enough to show her sincerity, she then knelt down completely. Makoto looked at the kneeling Hokage Konan, feeling an odd mix of emotions. Was it just a misunderstanding on their part, or had some confusion arisen between them? Hadn't he clearly told Hokage Konan that she could stay in this world? Back then, she had even wanted to leave. For a moment, Makoto's thoughts were in disarray. Hokage Konan waited in silence, but the Emperor still did not respond. Her mind drifted back to the worry that had been troubling her these past few days, the way this Emperor felt about her. Lowering her gaze, she bit her lower lip, a trace of sorrow appearing on her usually cold face. Your Majesty, she spoke in a soft voice. If your Majesty is willing to spare Yihiko, from now on, I will serve you with all my heart, without any other thoughts. Knowing that she could not go against the Emperor's will, she had already resigned herself to her fate. Saying it out loud now felt almost natural, though the sorrow and melancholy in her heart refused to fade. Makoto rested his hand on the armrest of his chair, propping his chin up as he gazed at her. Haven't you already belonged to me for a long time, he said. Hokage Konan's eyes wavered slightly at his words, then she lowered her head. Your Majesty is right, but, from now on, I will serve with even greater sincerity. I only hope your Majesty will show Yihiko mercy. Just a while ago, when Yihiko had come to plead with him, he had also asked Makoto to be merciful toward Hokage Konan. Makoto now found all of this rather amusing. I never intended to do anything to Yihiko. He is still young and has many years ahead of him to serve the Empire. Hearing this, Hokage Konan bowed her head deeply. Thank you, your Majesty. Enough, you may leave now, Makoto said, waving his hand dismissively. Hokage Konan rose to her feet, bowed respectfully once more, and turned to leave. One more thing, Makoto added, just as she reached the door. Tell Robin, Nami, and Hancock, I'll be visiting tonight. Understood. He's coming again tonight. Nami stared at Hokage Konan in shock as she returned. But didn't he just come over? Hancock, on the other hand, seemed rather pleased. Isn't it good that His Majesty likes visiting us? Nami suddenly realized something. She glanced at Hokage Konan, then at Robin, who also wore a thoughtful expression. Hokage Konan lowered her eyes and said softly, I'll be in my room. After she left, Nami shrugged and muttered, looks like the little rabbit is about to get eaten. Robin chuckled. Do you really think she's like a little rabbit? It's just a metaphor, Nami replied nonchalantly. Hokage Konan wasn't much of a little rabbit, she was more like a cold, delicate flower, about to be mercilessly plucked. Stretching lazily, Nami flopped onto the couch. Another exhausting night, sigh. Hancock couldn't help but say, do you really dislike His Majesty coming over? From what I saw, you seem to enjoy it quite a lot. Nami curled her lips. Enjoyment only lasts for a short while. Most of the time, I have to serve him. Why doesn't he come and serve me for once? Robin walked over and nudged her lightly with her foot. All right, enough of that. Just get ready. After tonight, we should have some peace for a while. In Hokage Konan's room, Robin knocked before entering. She saw Konan sitting quietly on the bed. Smiling, she walked over. You don't look too happy. Hokage Konan said flatly, I'm fine. It's nothing. Is it because of tonight? Of course, Robin knew that Hokage Konan must have heard everything the last time the Emperor visited. The noise was quite impossible to ignore. If their place wasn't a secluded estate, even the neighbors would have heard it. After a moment of silence, Hokage Konan suddenly asked, Robin, do you have someone you like? Robin paused for a second, then smiled again. So, you're feeling guilty toward the one you love, aren't you? Her mind worked swiftly. The moment Hokage Konan asked that question, Robin immediately thought of the men who had come looking for her before. The Empire's executive ministers, Lord Yihiko. And just like Lady Tsunade, Hokage Konan came from another similar world. Perhaps the one she spoke of, the person she loved, was none other than the Yihiko from that other world. Thinking it over, Robin felt that Konan was just like herself, just another powerless woman caught in the tides of fate. He's already dead, Hokage Konan said sorrowfully. Robin slowly responded, compared to my past life, I think my life now is already much better. If there's anyone out there who still cares about me, they should be relieved to see me living well. She looked at Hokage Konan and said gently, the best way to honor those who truly loved you, is to live well yourself. Hokage Konan remained silent. Somewhere within an unknown alternate dimension. It devoured the Soul King. Kayaraka looked at Yamamoto in utter shock. Just moments ago, Kayaraka's Ryatsu fluctuations had alerted some terrifying entity lurking within the endless darkness. They had been fleeing without pause ever since, even engaging in a battle along the way. It was only thanks to Ichibe's intervention that they managed to retreat safely. How is that possible? Kayaraka found it hard to believe. He turned his gaze toward the members of the royal guard. Ichibe Hyasube, Kiryu Hikifune, Tenjiro Karinji, Otsunomiya, and Senjimaru Shitara, each of them possessed captain-class strength, if not beyond. Their duty had always been to guard the Soul King. His eye swept over the gathered individuals, all of whom were once part of his original world, yet none of them currently resided in the Soul Society. Ichibe then began recounting everything that had transpired. Several months ago, one day in their original world, all contact with the Soul Society was suddenly severed. After an extensive investigation, they discovered that the entire Soul Society had vanished without a trace. Along with it, Hueco Mundo had disappeared as well. This shocking turn of events sent waves through the royal guard. The Soul Society was an essential pillar of balance in the world. Without it, how could deceased souls undergo reincarnation? However, just a few days after the disappearance of the Soul Society, a new world suddenly emerged. It bore the same name, Pure Land, and it too was governed by a Shinigami. Moreover, within this Pure Land resided a vast number of souls. Ichibe attempted to make contact with the leader of this new realm. The overseer was an elderly man with a third eye on his forehead, who called himself the Sage of Six Paths. The Sage of Six Paths was just as perplexed by the dramatic changes in the world, unable to comprehend why he had arrived here. He claimed that the world he originated from had never been like this. Through their exchange, Ichibe came to understand that the Soul Society and the Pure Land from two separate worlds might have been swapped. However, since both served a similar function, guiding the souls of the deceased to reincarnation, there was still a way to maintain order. After careful deliberation, Ichibe decided to restructure the world's balance and allow the Pure Land to take the place of the original Soul Society. Initially, Ichibe had feared that without the Soul Society, the world would collapse. But from what he had observed, there was still room for adjustment. The Sage of Six Paths proved to be a man of great wisdom and understanding, and their discussions proceeded smoothly. During these talks, Ichibe learned that the sage was merely a temporary custodian of the Pure Land. The true ruler was a singular existence also referred to as a Shinigami. However, this Shinigami had fallen into slumber not long ago after dealing with a particular entity. In order to stabilize the world, Ichibe gathered all the available forces. He sought out Urahara Kasuke, the Vizards, Jushiro Yukitake, who, for some reason, had been left behind in their original world, and others to form a new organization. Yet, things did not unfold as planned. Before long, the Shinigami of the Pure Land awakened. According to the Sage of Six Paths, this Shinigami was supposed to be an absolutely just and impartial existence. But the entity that had now awakened was nothing of the sort. It began devouring everything around it without hesitation, growing and evolving at an alarming rate. The first thing this Shinigami did upon waking was to consume the Sage of Six Paths. Then, it annihilated every soul within the Pure Land, eradicating everything in its domain before setting its sights on the living world. The souls of the living, as well as spiritual beings, all became its prey. This Shinigami was like a bottomless pit, an insatiable void. Ichibe had attempted to resist, only to find that the entity was far too powerful, beyond anything he could contend with. In truth, he had no idea what this thing even was. A Shinigami? No. This was no god. This was a monster. As it devoured everything in its path, it continued to undergo self-replication, producing countless clones of itself that would, in turn, consume everything around them, an endless, terrifying cycle. Jushiro Yukitake, the Hogyoku, the Wandenreich, all were devoured by it. In the end, even the Soul King fell victim to its destruction. The Soul King was the cornerstone of the world. Without the Soul King, the world collapsed. We fled into the Dangai, where we suddenly sensed Head Captain Yamamoto's faint Ryatsu. Using a special method, we made our way into this space and encountered Head Captain Yamamoto. But it followed us here as well. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tale Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tave at 300+ ch. Chapter 433, ch 433, Savior, His Majesty the Emperor. Night falls. Makoto arrived at the home of Robin and Hokage Konan. As soon as he pushed open the door, he was greeted by the fresh fragrance of shampoo and body wash, which filled the entire living room. Hancock was the one who opened the door to welcome him. She was always so eager and full of enthusiasm when facing Makoto, wanting to win his favor. Tonight, she was dressed in a red chipao, accentuating her tall and alluring figure. She knew that Makoto loved seeing her in such attire, so most of her wardrobe consisted of kipaos. She was also wearing high heels as she stood in the living room. Your Majesty. Hancock's face was adorned with a bright smile as she eagerly reached out to embrace Makoto, expressing her joy. The warm and fragrant atmosphere helped Makoto shed the fatigue of the day. Robin and Nami, who were in the living room, also bowed respectfully to Makoto. In a small group, as long as one person was well-mannered, they could influence the others to be the same. Makoto's lips curled into a slight smile. Wrapping one arm around Hancock's waist, he reached back to close the door and then walked further into the living room. The sound of running water echoed from the bathroom. Someone was still showering. Since Robin, Nami, and Hancock were all present, the one in the bathroom could only be Hokage Conan. Makoto remarked, "She hasn't come out yet." Robin lowered her head and said, "Apologies, Your Majesty. It's my fault for not reminding her to prepare in advance." As they spoke, the sound of water suddenly stopped. Before long, a figure emerged from the bathroom. Hokage Conan was dressed in a nightgown. Upon noticing the people in the living room, she seemed a little uneasy, her gaze flickering as she tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear. Once a god who governed the cycle of reincarnation, he had, for some unknown reason, fallen into depravity and become a demon that devoured everything. Few people pondered over this mystery, as they were far more concerned with the current state of the Soul Society. Originally, after traversing the Dangai, they had arrived here and learned about the fate of the Soul Society from Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. Now, having met Kairaku Shunsui, they finally heard the full account of everything that had transpired, including the Emperor's sinister plot. He intends to take full control of the Soul Society, Yamamoto said with a frown. After the first rebellion in the Soul Society, the Emperor of the living world became its so-called savior. If he were to rescue it once more, it would be all too easy for him to take over the now leaderless Siriidii. Ichibe Hyasub pondered for a moment before saying, "We must find a way to escape from here. If we can return to the Soul Society, that would be ideal." This dark void was completely empty, and it was only thanks to their extraordinary abilities that they had managed to endure for so long. However, they had already tried countless methods to escape, yet even the coordinates of the Dangai had been lost upon arriving here. There were those among them who wielded the power of space, as demonstrated by the Senkaman that connected the Soul Society to the living world. However, their abilities were far from reaching the level where they could open a portal with a mere wave of the hand, as Makoto could. "Unless someone from the Soul Society finds us and opens a gateway linking this place," Urahara Kasuke suddenly suggested. To the others, this seemed like nothing more than a faint glimmer of hope. Even if someone in the Soul Society possessed the ability to do so, how would they even realize that these people were trapped here? Yamamoto's disappearance had been orchestrated by the Emperor of the living world, making it appear as though he had been slain by a monstrous version of Kuchiki Byakuya. Not even the autopsy had revealed any inconsistencies. Now that Kairaku had gone missing, the scenario would likely repeat itself. With Siriidii backed into a corner, its only option would be to seek aid from the Empire of the living world once again. And thus, the true mastermind, the Emperor, would once more be hailed as the savior of the Soul Society. A night passed. Makoto was awakened by a subordinate's report, informing him that an envoy from the Soul Society had arrived and was currently waiting in the front hall of the palace. Outside, the sky was just beginning to brighten. Last night, he had spent a long time at Robin and Hokage Conan's place, only to be caught by Makoto and Kushina when he returned. As a result, he hadn't gotten much sleep. Stretching lazily, he got up and dressed. At this hour, even Niji, who was usually an early riser, had yet to stir. Once dressed, Makoto made his way to the front hall. It was still too early, even Samui hadn't arrived yet. The visitor was a familiar face, Unohana Retsu. She had also been the one to come seeking aid last time. "Coming so early, what's the matter, Captain Unohana?" Makoto sat lazily in the main seat, gazing at Unohana, who stood before him. "My deepest apologies for disturbing your Majesty's rest at this hour." Unohana first bowed in apology before continuing with a solemn expression, "I humbly request your Majesty's aid for the Soul Society once more." Makoto raised an eyebrow in apparent surprise. "What happened to the Soul Society?" Unohana explained, "Another rebellion has erupted, just like last time. Head Captain Kairaku has suddenly gone missing." Makoto feigned shock. "Head Captain Kairaku?" Unohana continued, "Lieutenant Ise Nanao is still unconscious. They were attending a noble banquet together, but every guest at the banquet mysteriously turned into a monster. We are currently investigating Head Captain Kairaku's whereabouts." Given the circumstances, many suspected that Kairaku had met the same fate as Head Captain Yamamoto, having already been killed. However, since there was no body this time, Unohana was reluctant to jump to conclusions. With the Godii 13 once again left without a head captain, she had no choice but to turn to the Emperor of the living world for help, hoping that, just like last time, he would extend his hand to aid the Soul Society. Makoto sat there in thought and asked, "Has there been any progress in the investigation of the previous rebellion?" Unohana replied, "Head Captain Kairaku was the one overseeing the investigation, but now that he has gone missing and his lieutenant remains unconscious. We questioned the members of the First Division, and there has been some progress. It appears to be related to the living world." "Oh." Makoto raised an eyebrow in surprise. If that's the case, why didn't you come to me earlier? If it concerns the living world, I would have been able to help. Anohana felt a sense of helplessness. This connection to the living world had only just come to light, and now this incident had occurred. Moreover, since it was related to the living world. Her thoughts wavered, but she maintained her composure and said, "Before we had the chance to discuss it with your majesty, this unfortunate event took place." She had come to the living world to seek the emperor's aid because there was simply no other option. Kairaku's disappearance had left the Shinigami of Siriitai without a proper leader. Although she was the most senior among them and had demonstrated her strength during the previous inter-world conference, her authority still did not compare to Kairaku. Among the captains, the only one who could have matched him in influence had been Captain Yukitake, who had disappeared even earlier. "Can you share the details of your investigation with me?" Makoto inquired. "If it involves the living world, I can also send people to look into it directly." At this moment, Anohana was hoping that the emperor would hurry to the Soul Society with her and suppress the rebellion first. However, she could only follow the emperor's lead, so she immediately relayed the intelligence gathered from the members of the First Division. The Shinigami's investigation had led them to the pirates of the vast ocean. Although Makoto had established the Maritime Guild, conflicts between various forces still arose in the depths of the sea. Where there was conflict, there were casualties. Where there were souls of the deceased, Shinigami naturally appeared. By chance, the Shinigami had witnessed a battle involving a Zoan-type devil fruit user. To their shock, his transformation bore an uncanny resemblance to the monstrous entities they had recently fought in the Soul Society. Makoto knew the Shinigami had reached this stage in their investigation, otherwise, he wouldn't have initiated the next step in his plan. However, based on Anohana's report, they had yet to obtain any concrete information before their trail was cut off. Anohana's explanation was brief. Once she finished, Makoto sat in thought for a moment before picking up a communication device and directly dialing the Water Mist City in the province of Water. At this early hour, most people were still asleep, except for a few night shift personnel who had yet to change shifts. Makoto waited for a response from Hyuga Kiyomi, the head of the Water Province's Ninja Guild branch, while Anohana had no choice but to wait alongside him. She faintly sensed that, unlike last time, the Emperor did not seem as eager to assist the Soul Society. She had already witnessed the overwhelming power of the Emperor. Quelling the rebellion in the Soul Society would be as effortless as lifting a finger for him. However, what he chose to do or not to do was not something she could question. A sense of unease crept into Anohana's heart. This time, something felt different from before. The Emperor of the living world had always proclaimed himself a friend of the Soul Society. His previous actions had even given her the illusion that he truly cared for their world. In the end, it all came down to interests and positions. "Captain Anohana, there's no need to be anxious. It's better to uncover the root of this matter first, otherwise, it will just be like last time, treating the symptoms but not the cause," the Emperor reassured her. "Your Majesty is right," Anohana could only agree, though in her heart, she thought that Siriitai had already become a battlefield, with people dying every moment. The immediate crisis had to be dealt with first. Outside, the misty sky gradually brightened as the sun rose. Makoto leaned back in his chair, finding a comfortable position, and closed his eyes to rest. Samui then arrived. Seeing Makoto and Anohana on the first floor of the pavilion, she was slightly surprised but immediately bowed to Makoto. "Your Majesty." Makoto responded calmly. "Your Majesty is here quite early today," Samui remarked. "There are matters to attend to," Makoto said before yawning. "Massage my shoulders. I didn't sleep well last night." Samui glanced at the resting Emperor, then moved behind him and began massaging his shoulders. Her movements were skilled and gentle. This was something she had done many times before, and it came naturally to her. However, ever since Hokage Tsunade, Hancock, and Kagaya had entered the Emperor's inner circle, she had fewer opportunities to do this. The familiar fragrance of his close aid made Makoto feel even more relaxed. Across from him, Anohana watched the scene with an unchanged expression, but her mind was filled with countless thoughts. Would this Emperor of the living world still help the Soul Society? What exactly did he want? Even if the Soul Society survived this ordeal, the outcome would be worse than last time. Previously, with Yamamoto, the Soul Society had the strength to stand on equal footing with the living world. But now, even Kairaku had gone missing. Could it be that this Emperor had developed some new ideas because of this? And the matter Kairaku had been investigating was connected to the living world. If she dared to think boldly, Anohana realized that she could easily view the Emperor before her as a scheming conspirator with ulterior motives. "Your Majesty, would you like to have a light meal?" "All right." Samui went to the lounge on the second floor. Now that they were alone in the room, Anohana hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Your Majesty, while uncovering the root cause of the turmoil is important, right now, countless monsters are rampaging through the Soul Society. We Shinigami have suffered heavy casualties. Could your Majesty help us first?" Before she could finish, the communication device on the table suddenly rang, interrupting her. Makoto picked it up and placed it to his ear. Seeing this, Anohana had no choice but to fall silent. She couldn't make out the voice on the other end, nor could she read anything from the Emperor's expression. After a moment, Makoto put the device down. "Your Majesty." Anohana fixed her gaze on him. But Makoto simply curled his lips into a smile. "Let's go, to the Soul Society." Hearing those words, Anohana finally breathed a sigh of relief. She hoped that all her earlier concerns were just overthinking. At that moment, Samui returned, carrying a tray with some snacks and tea. Makoto casually picked up a piece of pastry, popped it into his mouth, and then, without hesitation, sliced open a spatial gate and stepped through. Above the Soul Society, Makoto and Anohana stood high in the sky. The scene below was nearly identical to the last time. Makoto didn't act immediately. Instead, he turned to Anohana and asked. "This time as well, these monsters were all once noblemen of Siriidii, weren't they?" Anohana was momentarily stunned before she gave a slight nod. Makoto continued, "If they are all killed, then what will the future of the Soul Society in Siriidii look like?" Anohana suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. One riot last time. Another riot this time. Siriidii had lost not only 2 head captains and a great number of Shinigami, but also the nobility. Between these 2 incidents, nearly the entire upper echelon of Siriidii had been wiped out. If they were all slaughtered once more, what would become of Siriidii's future? Without a head captain, without nobles to govern, how would the Godii 13 continue to function? A terrible realization struck Anohana, and she abruptly turned her head to look at the men beside her. Just like last time, this Emperor of the Living World was about to become the Soul Society's savior once again. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tavet 300+ ch. Chapter 434, ch 434, Ruling over the Soul Society. The Soul Society was in complete chaos, with countless Shinigami struggling bitterly against the monstrous creatures that had suddenly appeared. The disappearance of head captain Kairaku had not yet been made public, and for now, it was the captains of the Godii 13 who were organizing the defense. This time, the scale of the monster outbreak was no less than the last one, making it extremely difficult for the Shinigami of Siriidii to resist. Seeing the devastation consuming the Soul Society, countless Shinigami could only pray in their hearts that the Emperor of the Living World would appear once more and save them, just like before. Suddenly, a golden beam of light shot up into the sky in the distance. The moment this scene unfolded, countless Shinigami's eyes widened in shock, because they had seen this before. That pillar of golden light, sharp as a blade cleaving the heavens, was a signature technique of the Emperor of the Living World. Wherever the golden light descended, it obliterated everything in its path. Among the horde of monsters, a towering female figure was locked in battle against several captains. But as the golden pillar slashed downward, it instantly cleaved her in 2, killing her on the spot. This is Komamura Sajin, who had been fighting desperately, was momentarily stunned by the sudden turn of events. All eyes turned toward the source of the golden light. High above in the distance, 2 familiar figures stood in the sky. This scene was all too familiar. The savior who had once rescued the Soul Society, had he come to save them once again? A glowing purple orb slowly ascended into the sky, radiating light like a violet sun, casting its illumination across the entire Siriidii. The exhausted Shinigami, weary from battle, couldn't help but pause at the sight. In the next instant, over 1,000 beams of white light shot out simultaneously in all directions. Each beam struck with absolute precision, piercing through the monsters' bodies and killing them instantly. It all happened in a single moment. Just like before, this display of divine power etched itself deeply into the minds of every Shinigami. High above in the sky, Anohana watched the scene unfold with a complicated expression. A calamity that threatened the very survival of the Soul Society. For this Emperor of the Living World, was it truly something he could resolve with a mere wave of his hand? Once was like this, and now twice as well, just like a meticulously rehearsed play, making the Shinigami seem utterly powerless in comparison. His Majesty is truly divine in might, Anohana spoke from the side. Makoto chuckled lightly and said, it was nothing but a trivial effort. Anohana looked at the ruins below, thinking to herself, it's already in such a state of devastation. With the head captain gone and the upper noble class nearly wiped out, where would the Soul Society go from here? She felt that even if the Emperor of the Living World took advantage of the situation and sought to claim the Soul Society as his own, it would be understandable. With his immense strength, having such ambition would be nothing out of the ordinary. And right now, the Soul Society was completely defenseless. If the Emperor simply willed it, they might have no choice but to bow their heads to him. Captain Anohana, Makoto suddenly called out. Your Majesty, Anohana promptly responded. I will have my people thoroughly investigate the source of these creatures in the living world. If you Shinigami have any requests, feel free to come to me at any time. Thank you, Your Majesty. We truly have no way to repay such kindness. Don't say that, Makoto replied with a faint smile. The fact that you Shinigami selflessly protect the balance of the world, I deeply admire that. Moreover. As he spoke, his gaze shifted toward her, his smile widening. Having someone as outstanding as Captain Unohana fall victim to these creatures would be far too great a loss. At these words, Unohana's heart involuntarily tightened. The two descended onto a vacant area below, and Unohana then used Tentikura to summon all the captains to the scene. Together, they expressed their gratitude toward the Emperor of the living world and then bid him farewell. After saving the Soul Society from its crisis, Makoto departed immediately, not through the Senkamen but by tearing open a rift in space, returning directly to the living world. To some captains, it seemed as though the Emperor was eager to leave to avoid any unnecessary misunderstandings, a sign of his noble character. Many praised him for this, while Unohana stood quietly to the side, saying nothing. At that moment, a squad member suddenly arrived to report that the Central 46 Chambers had summoned the captains for a council meeting. They still have people alive. Jin remarked with mild surprise. He had assumed that after this turmoil, the entire Central 46 Chambers would have been wiped out. Mind your words, Soifan, the captain of the 2nd Division, frowned. The Central 46 Chambers merely represented the noble factions of Siriitii, led by the 4 great noble clans. In both of these uprisings, the monsters that had emerged were all transformed from high-ranking nobles of Siriitii. Whether that was a coincidence or something else remained unknown. As long as nobility existed, even if the entire Central 46 Chambers were wiped out, they could always be reassembled. That was why, in the original storyline, even though Aizen had slaughtered the then-current Central 46 Chambers, a new group was later appointed to pass judgment on him. The captains arrived at the Central 46 compound, which was now in a state of ruin, though guards still stood at the entrance. Inside the council hall, they found the remaining members of the Central 46, though only a few had survived. These individuals were still, in name, the ones governing them, so the captains respectfully paid their greetings. The middle-aged man leading the group was from the Shihoin clan, someone all the captains recognized. He spoke. We have summoned you all here to discuss the fate of the Soul Society after this catastrophe. With 2 head captains missing and the Soul Society severely weakened, if Hueco Mundo were to make any moves now, they would be completely defenseless. Moreover, the Soul Society no longer had the power to stand on equal footing with the living world. They had already sought the aid of the Emperor of the living world twice. Were they supposed to shamelessly beg for help again the next time disaster struck? The Shinigami who were meant to govern the cycle of life and death were now weaker than a mortal ruler. This was a terrifying reality. If, in the future, an immensely powerful being from the living world were to defy death, how would they enforce their laws? Would the boundaries between life and death not be shattered then? Komamura Sajin spoke up. I believe the Emperor of the living world is a just ruler. He aids the Soul Society not only out of goodwill but also to maintain the stability of the world. Goodwill. What goodwill did the Soul Society have toward the living world? Guiding the dead to the afterlife and maintaining the balance of life and death was indeed of great importance to the living world. The Soul Society also relied on a continuous influx of souls. In some ways, the duty of the Shinigami was not purely for the sake of some grand cosmic justice. Among the captains, Aizen had remained silent. Normally, he always maintained a refined and gentle demeanor, but on an occasion like this, one that concerned the very fate of the Soul Society, he should have been actively participating. Yet, he had not spoken a single word. That was because he already knew how this would end. The Emperor of the living world was not only going to take control of the Soul Society, but he would also have the Shinigami begging him to do so. That conversation he had with the Emperor of the living world had revealed many things. The two had discussed much, and Aizen had come to understand the Emperor's entire plan. The truth was that this monstrous uprising had been orchestrated by none other than the Emperor himself. The so-called Central 46 Chambers had long since fallen under his control. Once the turmoil settled, the Central 46 would propose submitting to the Empire of the living world. If a majority opposed the idea, then the Emperor's hidden ally, the ruler of Hueco Mundo, would launch an attack on the Soul Society. The Central 46 member from the Shihoin family spoke with a stern expression, Siriitii must change. Otherwise, we won't even be able to protect ourselves. Our first priority must be survival before we can consider anything else. If another catastrophe like this happens again and the living world refuses to aid us, what will we do? Komamura Sajin said, I believe His Majesty, the Emperor of the living world, would not stand idly by. A member of the Central 46 immediately refuted, and what makes you so sure? Should we entrust the fate of the Soul Society to a mere belief? Komamura Sajin was left speechless. What exactly are you suggesting? Hitsugaya Toshiro asked. Then, the captain of the 12th Division, Kuratsuchi Mayuri, spoke with a sinister tone, why not submit to the living world now? That way, we can rightfully seek his protection while continuing to maintain the stability of the Soul Society. His words plunged the room into silence. When they first arrived in this world and witnessed the power of the living world's ninja, they had already considered an important question. When the Emperor of the living world eventually reaches the end of his lifespan and his soul arrives in the Soul Society, how should they accommodate him? Before, with head Captain Yamamoto still present, they believed it wouldn't be an issue. They all thought that no one could surpass the strongest Shinigami of the past 1,000 years. But now, both head Captain Yamamoto and Captain Kairaka were gone, and so the answer to that question had changed. They would pledge their allegiance to him. A few days later, Makoto received news in Konoha that the Soul Society had not sent anyone to investigate the source of the monsters. Perhaps they were preoccupied with rebuilding Siri, or perhaps there was another reason. This morning, Makoto suddenly received a report from the station Shinigami at Siri's Konoha office, informing him that a captain would be visiting. However, it was not only a captain who came to visit. Members of the Central 46 accompanied them, appearing at the Reincarnation Palace in a solemn and formal ceremony, requesting an audience with the Emperor of the Living World. Makoto granted them this audience, receiving them in the council hall of the front palace. Leading the captains was now Anohana, as she was the most senior among them. The other captains present included Soifun, captain of the 2nd Division. Ichimaru Jin, captain of the 3rd Division. Aizen Sosuke, captain of the 5th Division. Komamura Sajin, captain of the 7th Division. Shuinsue Jiro Sakuranasuke, captain of the 8th Division. Tozen Kanami, captain of the 9th Division. Hitsugaya Toshiro, captain of the 10th Division. Zaraki Kenpachi, captain of the 11th Division. Kuratsuchi Mayuri, captain of the 12th Division. Makoto had already anticipated their purpose. Watching them kneel before him in unison, first expressing their gratitude for saving the Soul Society, then praising his virtue and martial prowess, it almost resembled a formal tribute ceremony, had they not previously been allies rather than adversaries. We sincerely hope that your Majesty will accept our pledge of loyalty. Makoto modestly declined at first, but Anohana spoke sincerely, saying that for the stability of the world, they hoped the Emperor would take control of the Soul Society. Following her words, the entire delegation collectively pleaded in unison. Only then did Makoto, reluctantly, accept. Makoto then said, the source of the monster crisis has been found. Like you, they are also beings from another world. I have already sent people to capture them, and they will be delivered to the Soul Society for trial. Everyone expressed their gratitude once more. Makoto then asked, there are still vacant captain positions in the Godai 13, correct? Anohana was momentarily stunned but quickly understood his implication and responded, yes. These 2 disasters have left us with heavy casualties, and we've lost many outstanding members. As for the vacant captain positions, Siri currently has no suitable candidates. After a brief pause, Makoto said, Captain Anohana, from this moment forward, I appoint you as head captain of the Godai 13 and captain of the 1st Division. Anohana lowered her head in acknowledgement. Understood. The 4th, 6th, and 13th Divisions still remained without captains. The 4th Division was responsible for medical care and logistics, but Anohana knew that the Emperor had no particular interest in that area. She planned to train her lieutenant, Isen Kotetsu, so that once she mastered Bankai, she could take over as the captain of the 4th Division. As for the 6th and 13th Divisions, one was dedicated to upholding noble interests, while the other was responsible for guiding souls from the living world and purifying hollows. The Emperor clearly intended to take direct control over both divisions. The 13th Division needed to maintain direct contact with the Empire, and as for the 6th Division, there were no longer any high-ranking nobles left, only a few minor aristocrats remained. Makoto slowly said, I happen to have 2 excellent candidates in mind. A living world native becoming a Shinigami captain. Anohana lowered her head respectfully and said obediently, we shall follow your Majesty's arrangements. Makoto rose from his imperial seat and walked slowly toward Anohana. Looking down at her kneeling form, he reached out and helped her up. Head Captain Anohana, do not disappoint my expectations, Makoto said with a faint smile, his hand grasping her wrist. Anohana's emotions were complicated at that moment. For 1,000 years, she no longer knew what kind of person she had become. She had once resolved to abandon her past and atone for her sins slowly. And yet, now, she had suddenly become the head captain. The others remained kneeling in silence. Anohana subtly withdrew her hand when she felt the Emperor's fingers lightly trace over the back of it. Without changing her expression, she solemnly said, I will do my utmost to fulfill my duty. Rise, Makoto said, allowing everyone else to stand. The gathered captains expressed their gratitude. Makoto then instructed his umbu to summon 2 individuals. Within 10 minutes, Uchiha Obito and Sarutobi Asuma appeared in the Great Hall, each with a Nichiren blade fastened at their waists. These two men, one is an elite ninja of the Empire's Uchiha clan, and the other is the son of the former third Hokage. Both are outstanding talents of the Empire. Makoto introduced them to the assembled captains. He had previously bestowed Nichiren blades upon them and had them undergo intense, continuous training. Now, both had already mastered Bankai. From now on, Uchiha Obito will serve as the captain of the 6th Division, and Sarutobi Asuma will take charge of the 13th Division. Naturally, no one dared to voice any objections. In the future, more Solarite towers can be built in the Soul Society to help maintain its security. After issuing all necessary instructions, the representatives from the Soul Society prepared to take their leave. The follow-up tasks would need to be carried out gradually. As Makoto watched Unohana's departing figure, he gently stroked his chin, his gaze flickering with a thoughtful glint. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tavet 300+ ch. Chapter 435, ch 435, Terror is approaching. Konoha's main gate. Two travel-worn figures appeared at the entrance. The young man wearing a straw hat gazed at the grand and magnificent gate, which was completely different from how he remembered it. His expression was somewhat complex. "Master, what's wrong?" asked the red-haired boy beside him. "It's been too long since I last returned." "Everything has changed," the young man said calmly. At that moment, a gate attendant called out to them, "If you wish to enter Konoha, please come over and register." The two followed his instructions and cooperated with the procedure. "Please remove your hat. We need to record your facial information." The young man lifted his straw hat, revealing striking red hair. The attendant was momentarily stunned, as the man's appearance was far too familiar. "You are..." He hesitated in disbelief. "The second Hokage." The young man replied calmly, "I am Senju Tobiama." "It's really the second Hokage." All the personnel at the gate were immediately drawn to the scene. "Lord Second Hokage, you've returned." To these Konoha shinobi, the Hokage remained a figure of utmost reverence. One of them, unable to contain his excitement, said, "I'll report to His Majesty at once." "His Majesty?" Tobirama asked, "Are we allowed to enter?" The registration process was completed swiftly, and both Tobirama and the red-haired boy were granted entry. Konoha was far larger than he remembered. Upon passing through the gate, they stepped onto smooth, well-paved roads surrounded by towering buildings. The streets bustled with life, filled with crowds of people. "Amazing." The red-haired boy murmured in awe as he took in his surroundings. The last time he had been here, the village had not looked like this. He had heard many stories about Konoha's transformation, but seeing it with his own eyes was still astonishing. In addition to the pedestrians, there were strange vehicles moving through the streets, large, rectangular transports with 4 wheels, seating a dozen people in 2 rows, covered by a canopy. Their speed wasn't particularly fast, but they were certainly quicker than walking. The scene before them made the two feel as if they had stepped into a foreign land, an unfamiliar civilization. Tobirama lifted his gaze toward the distant Solarite towers and the brutal justice, which he had already noticed even before arriving in Konoha. "Let's go." They wandered through the city for a long time, and gradually, the surrounding buildings began to change. As they reached the heart of Konoha, the familiar architecture overlapped with Tobirama's memories once more. Konoha had expanded, its outer area was now the new district, while the inner section remained the old district. Tobirama led the red-haired boy through the city until they arrived at a quiet residence. He knocked on the door. "Coming." The door was opened by Shizun, who visibly froze upon seeing Tobirama. "Lord SS Second Hokage." Tobirama nodded. "Shizun, where is Tsunade?" Shizun quickly turned around and shouted, "Master." "Lady Tsunade." "Lord Second Hokage is here." "Lord Second Hokage has returned." Moments later, Tobirama saw 2 Tsunades appear at the entrance, one following closely behind the other. For a brief moment, he was completely dumbfounded. Both of them smiled with joy and called out in unison, "Granduncle." Tobirama. Front hall of the Imperial Palace. The second Hokage has returned. Makoto was somewhat surprised upon hearing the report from his subordinates. Back when Tobirama successfully revived himself, he had left Konoha to travel the world. Even after the empire was established, he had never returned. Makoto had occasionally received news of Tobirama's whereabouts, but they were always rather mundane. That afternoon, Tobirama arrived at the palace to meet him, accompanied by the same red-haired boy from before. Makoto remembered that the boy's name was Shiro, a name given by Tobirama himself. If he recalled correctly, this boy had some connection to Orochimaru in the past. However, the moment Makoto laid eyes on Shiro, he immediately sensed something was off, his gaze turning thoughtful. Makoto then looked at Tobirama and asked, "Have you still not found a way to restore your soul?" Tobiama gave a slight nod. Makoto continued, what about the missing part of your soul? After a moment of contemplation, Tobiama took out a scroll. Upon seeing this, Makoto effortlessly unfurled the scroll from a distance, releasing the fragmented soul sealed inside. At that very moment, Tobiama suddenly felt an incredible lightness in his body. He then realized, with a shock, that his soul had left his physical form, floating in midair, completely immobilized. Makoto guided Tobiama's soul to merge with the missing fragment, allowing them to slowly reintegrate. Once the fusion was complete, he returned Tobiama's soul to his body. When Tobiama opened his eyes again, he looked down at his hands, his expression slightly dazed. How do you feel? Makoto asked. Tobiama remained silent for a moment before responding, I don't feel anything. Back when he first split his soul, he had said that severing one's soul was a terrifying thing. He had known he was incomplete, yet never felt anything was truly wrong. The fragmented piece of his soul, though weaker than him in power, was otherwise identical. It was still Senju Tobiama. Now that they had been reunited, Tobiama could only sense that he was somehow more complete, stronger. Other than that, there was nothing. He didn't even feel the presence of another consciousness. Taking a deep breath, he said, thank you. Makoto then shifted his gaze to the red-haired boy standing beside Tobiama. This child is strange. Shiro instinctively shrank back behind Tobiama, seemingly afraid of Makoto. When Makoto first met this boy, he had not yet mastered the power to control souls and dictate life and death. But now, things were different. The moment he laid eyes on the boy again, he immediately noticed the issue. Tobiama pondered for a moment before saying, you've noticed it too, haven't you? His body carries two souls that have merged together. He had kept this child by his side for a long time before finally realizing this anomaly. Makoto recalled how Orochimaru had once split himself into countless fragments. Could it be that one of the souls within this boy belonged to Orochimaru? If that were the case, then who did the other soul belong to? Makoto considered forcibly separating the souls within the boy, but doing so might cause him irreparable harm. Who do you think the other soul belongs to? He asked. Tobiama fell silent for a moment before slowly replying, one of them is likely Orochimaru's. As for the other one, it might be Saru. Siriitii, 6th Division Barracks. My name is Uchiha Obito. From now on, I'll be serving as the captain of the 6th Division. No need to be too formal with me, I'm actually pretty easygoing, ha ha ha. Facing a group of unfamiliar subordinates, Obito introduced himself a bit awkwardly. Greetings, Captain. I am your lieutenant, Abarai Renji. Captains have the authority to appoint their own lieutenants, so if you find me unsuitable, you are free to replace me at any time. Looking at the red-haired, tattooed man before him, Obito had a feeling he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Before coming here, he had learned that these Shinigami lived far longer than humans. Several centuries was nothing unusual. This realization made him a little uneasy. But he quickly smiled and said, no need for that. If the previous captain saw potential in you, that means you're definitely capable. Since I'm new here, there's a lot I'll need your help with. Renji's expression darkened slightly at the mention of his former captain. With a serious tone, he said, the previous captain was a criminal who killed head Captain Yamamoto. I ask that you refrain from mentioning him in the future. Obito was momentarily stunned but then nodded. Understood. After introducing himself to the rest of the seated officers, Renji brought in a stack of division paperwork for Obito to review. Staring at the towering pile of documents, Obito couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. Sigh. Why did His Majesty give me this kind of position? Life in Konoha had been much more relaxed. Most of his time was spent training, occasionally taking on missions, discussing architecture with builders, or trying, and failing, to ask Rin out for a meal. Before coming here, the Emperor had assured him that as long as he fulfilled his duties, he could return to Konoha whenever he wanted. Now that the Soul Society was under the Emperor's rule, the travel restrictions between the two realms had been lifted. Any Shinigami ranked lieutenant or higher could freely enter and leave the world of the living. Anyone with a keen eye could see that the Emperor was planning a major reform in the Soul Society. Sitting in his office chair, Obito gazed out the window. Ever since arriving, he had felt something strange, an inexplicable sensation, as if something unseen was calling out to him. Outside the captain's office, the members of the 6th Division gathered around their lieutenant, Abarai Renji, discussing their newly appointed captain. This Uchiha captain seems kind of unreliable, doesn't he? Yeah, I feel the same way. Compared to. He's from the world of the living, and he's only in his 20s. Renji stood there in silence, listening to the murmurs. Truthfully, he shared their concerns. Though he had called Captain Byakuya a criminal, he bore no hatred toward him, only deep regret. Comparing Byakuya to Obito, the difference in presence alone was stark. It was as if they weren't even in the same league. But since Obito came from the world of the living and was a noble of the empire, Renji reasoned that he couldn't be an ordinary person. He still vividly remembered that interdimensional exchange meeting, where Byakuya had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Kakashi, one of the Empire's 10 crown guards. Even if this Obito wasn't as strong as Kakashi, he had to at least be part of the elite just below the 10 crown guards. Alright, enough gossiping. Captain Uchiha was personally appointed by His Majesty. There must be something extraordinary about him. Renji picked up another stack of documents and entered the captain's office, only to find his new captain sound asleep on the desk. His lips twitched involuntarily. Walking up, he called out, "Captain Uchiha." Obito groggily opened his eyes. Seeing Renji, he gave an embarrassed smile. "Sorry, I dozed off." Renji thought for a moment before offering a suggestion. "Captain, do you dislike handling administrative work?" Obito scratched his head. "I just haven't really done much of it before. If you'd rather not stay cooped up in the office, you could take a walk around to familiarize yourself with the division and its surroundings." The 6th Division had traditionally been a noble division, but after 2 major upheavals, most of the high-ranking nobles had perished. Renji had a feeling that change was coming. Obito readily agreed to the suggestion, immediately getting up. "Alright, let's go." Grabbing his Nichiren blade, he left the office with Renji accompanying him. The 6th Division's barracks were quite large, with a clean and orderly design. However, there wasn't much to see, so the two left and wandered aimlessly. The architecture of the entire City was fairly uniform, and with its winding, interwoven streets, it was easy to get lost. Fortunately, Renji was there to guide the way. Along the way, they encountered a few ordinary Shinigami, who, upon seeing the white haori draped over Obito's shoulders, immediately bowed in respect. Obito wasn't used to receiving such deference, but he thoroughly enjoyed it. Noticing that Renji kept glancing at his waist, he asked, "What are you looking at?" Renji replied, "I'm looking at your sword, Captain." Obito paused, then chuckled. "Are you that curious?" Since the Nichiren blade was sheathed, its appearance was obscured by sunlight. However, Obito had intentionally wrapped a layer of black cloth around the scabbard. "Not really. I was just curious, that's all." Without hesitation, Obito drew his Nichiren blade and casually handed it to Renji. Renji was stunned and a bit flustered. "Captain, this." Obito simply said, "You're curious, aren't you?" Renji fell silent before solemnly accepting the sword with both hands. The blade was long and slender, with strange patterns along its edge that shimmered under the light. "What's your sword's name, Captain?" "Kamui." "That's a powerful name." Obito took the sword back, sheathing it with a grin. "Renji, you must be pretty strong, right?" Renji replied, "Not really. I'm just an ordinary lieutenant." Obito laughed. "I watched the last interdimensional exchange event. That Kakashi guy really stole the show. I've been wanting to spar with the Shinigami, how about we go a few rounds?" Renji asked in surprise, "You know Lord Kakashi?" "We're very close. We were even teammates back when we were genin." 30 minutes later, Obito and Renji returned to the 6th Division's barracks. The news of their spar spread like wildfire, drawing a massive crowd of spectators. Renji secretly groaned. Losing in front of so many people would be humiliating. No matter how unreliable Obito seemed, there was no way his strength was inferior to his own. Obito slowly unsheathed his sword, smiling. "Come to think of it, I haven't actually fought anyone with this yet." Renji, his expression serious, replied, "Then it's my honor, Captain." Avoid space of unknown location. There's a disturbance in space. Ichibe suddenly sensed something and hurriedly informed the others around him. "Where does it lead?" someone asked. Frowning deeply, Ichibe replied, "I'm not sure. The signal is very faint, and..." He gazed in a particular direction, hesitating before continuing, "The coordinates are very close to it." That it referred to a certain Shinigami. Every encounter with that being had led to a desperate struggle for survival. This space contained no reishi, meaning that any ryatsu they expended in battle could not be replenished. "Should we check it out?" The group exchanged uncertain glances. They had been trapped in this accursed void for an unknown amount of time, with no clue when, or if, they would ever escape. But if they remained here, dying at the hands of that Shinigami was inevitable. "We go," Yamamoto declared firmly. "If we miss this chance, who knows how long it will be before another one appears. No matter what world it leads to, we have no other choice." Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tavet 300+ ch. Chapter 436, ch 436, Formless Coffin. 6th Division Barracks. The new captain of the 6th Division, Uchiha Obito, was currently sparring with his lieutenant. Abarai Renji was in a bit of a predicament. At the start of their match, he had noticed that his captain's swordsmanship was rather mediocre. Thinking this could be his opening, he aimed to put up a respectable performance, not necessarily to win, but at least to avoid an embarrassing defeat. However, while Captain Uchiha's swordsmanship might have been average, his other abilities were overwhelmingly powerful. Renji knew that ninja were adept at using techniques called ninjutsu, and this captain seemed particularly skilled in them, spewing flames, manipulating trees, and launching attacks that were nearly impossible to defend against. As their battle continued, Renji realized that his attacks were having no effect on his captain whatsoever. It was as if Obito wasn't really there, merely an illusion standing in his place. Before a crowd of onlookers, Renji launched strike after strike, only to be effortlessly outmaneuvered every single time. Panting heavily, he felt utterly frustrated and finally paused to ask, "Captain, are you planning to just keep dodging forever?" Obito chuckled awkwardly. "Sorry about that. You're right, this isn't much of a proper fight. I was just trying to get used to my powers in this world." Saying this, he tightened his grip on his glowing Nichiren blade and looked directly at Renji. "Alright then, from here on out, I'll use my full strength." Full strength. Renji froze for a moment before his eyes widened in panic. "Wait. Captain, you don't mean..." But it was already too late. Obito had taken his stance, and his chakra surged, instantly reaching its peak. Bankai. Renji's face turned pale. He had only wanted his captain to stop toying with him, not to go straight into Bankai against a mere lieutenant. In an instant, Renji's vision blurred. The world around him shattered like broken glass, and the vibrant colors of reality vanished, leaving behind a pitch-black void. He looked around in confusion, unable to comprehend where he was. The 6th Division barracks were gone. The captain, the squad members, everything had disappeared. There was no trace of spiritual pressure in the surroundings. All that remained was a vast, endless nothingness. At that moment, a weak voice sounded in Renji's ear. "Hey, are you a Shinigami?" Renji spun around sharply, only to see a man covered in blood. He wore what seemed to be a green short-sleeved top and clutched a straight-edged blade without a guard. At the same time, back at the 6th Division barracks, the gathered squad members looked at each other in shock. Lieutenant Renji disappeared. His Ryatsu is completely gone. What just happened? What's going on? Obito was also stunned. His Bankai indeed had the ability to manipulate space. When His Majesty had witnessed it, he had even praised it as an extremely powerful ability. But just now, Obito had not intended to send Renji into another dimension. When he activated his Bankai, an uncontrollable surge of power had suddenly erupted from his right arm, transferring directly into his blade. He lowered his gaze to his right arm. It was wrapped in bandages. His original arm had been crushed under falling rocks when he was a teenager. Later, Uchiha Madara had grafted white Zetsu cells onto him, and after returning to the village, the 4th Hokage at the time, Orochimaru, had given him a fully regenerated limb. After a moment, one of the squad members couldn't hold back any longer and asked, "Captain, where is Lieutenant Renji?" Obito took a deep breath and activated his Bankai once more. The space Renji had been sent to wasn't his usual dimension, it was somewhere else entirely. And for some reason, his right arm seemed to be the key to linking that unknown space. Focusing his will, he guided the energy in his right arm back into his Nichiren blade. A black, chaotic vortex slowly formed in the air before him. From every angle, it appeared the same, as if space itself were collapsing inward. Obito narrowed his eyes at the vortex, sensing that something was off. Suddenly, his right arm flared up with a burning, itchy sensation. That strange feeling he had since arriving in Soul Society, the sensation that something was calling out to him, grew even stronger. For a long moment, he stood motionless. Then, at last, something within the vortex responded. 2 massive, pitch-black arms, completely inhuman in shape, suddenly reached out, gripping the edges of the vortex. With sheer force, the entity tore open the swirling void, widening it from the size of a person to an enormous rift several meters wide. Obito stood frozen in place, suddenly sensing an overwhelming sense of danger. He immediately attempted to close the spatial rift, but it was already too late. No matter how much chakra he channeled, the pitch-black figure continued to emerge from within, inch by inch. Imperial Palace, Front Hall. At this moment, Makoto was resting on Kagaya's lap, eyes closed in a light nap. Beside them stood the newly appointed head captain of Siriidii, Unohana Retsu. Unohana was reporting the latest progress on Siriidii's reconstruction. Unlike the last time, things were progressing much faster with substantial support from the living world. Konohagakure had sent numerous mechanical puppets and large-scale machinery to assist with labor-intensive tasks, their efficiency far exceeding that of ordinary workers. The emperor had issued several decrees, the first of which was to completely sever the connection between Siriidii and Rakangai, turning Rakangai into a place meant solely for housing deceased souls. Unohana immediately realized, this was a move to fully control the Shinigami forces. With the existence of Nichiren blades, the Empire had already mastered the ability to guide the dead and purify hollows. Eventually, they could replace the Shinigami entirely. Now that the Soul Society had become dependent on the Emperor, the boundary between life and death had grown increasingly blurred. The Emperor must have recognized this as an unsustainable situation, choosing to reconstruct a stable cycle of life and death through different means. Once a person dies, they are truly dead. The dead would no longer have the opportunity to become Shinigami. Instead, only the living would serve as Shinigami. And once the Tower of Solarity fully covered the entire world, guiding the souls of the deceased would become a fully automated process. To Anohana, the Emperor's foresight was undeniable. Yet at times, she found him excessively ambitious. Thinking back to the hidden aspirations she had sensed in him before, she couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. And then, there was this white-eyed woman beside him. The moment she had entered the hall, Anohana had sensed her extraordinary presence, a feeling akin to an insurmountable gap in existence itself. She and this woman were not even on the same level. Unlike the Emperor, who concealed his strength, this woman made no effort to hide hers. Anohana had never imagined that someone this powerful could exist. Previously, during the interdimensional exchange, she had believed that Tsunade and Anko were among the strongest women in the living world. Yet this woman, strong beyond reason, was now obediently offering her lap as a pillow, calling the Emperor master. Anohana lowered her gaze and said, "Your Majesty, that concludes my report." The Emperor, eyes still closed, responded with a faint though it was unclear whether he had truly been listening. Taking this as her cue, Anohana bowed slightly and said, "I shall take my leave." The Emperor offered no further response. Anohana gave a respectful bow and was about to turn to leave when his voice rang out once more. "Captain Anohana. I am here, Your Majesty." The organization that all Shinigami belong to, is it called the Godai 13? Yes, it is. Don't you find that name rather strange? The duty of the Shinigami is to maintain the stability of the world, so why is it called the Godai, the court guard? Anohana fell silent for a moment before replying in a calm tone, "What does Your Majesty believe it should be called?" After all, it had been the upper-class nobles of the Soul Society who had chosen to submit to the Emperor of the living world in the first place. And one of the primary responsibilities of the Shinigami had always been to protect these very nobles. She cast a sidelong glance at the Emperor, who remained reclined on the white-eyed woman's lap, and found it utterly ironic. "There's no rush to change the name," the Emperor continued, "but I believe that among the 13 divisions, quite a few of them serve no real purpose. What do you think, Captain Anohana?" "If that is Your Majesty's judgment, then I have no objections," Anohana answered. She felt no particular sense of duty toward the Soul Society or Siriidii. When the Emperor had appointed her as head captain, she hadn't refused. She had known full well that she was nothing more than a puppet. And now, with the Emperor openly taking step after step to consume the Soul Society, she had no intention of resisting. Because she knew, she was powerless to stop it. To obediently play the role of a compliant tool, to simply go with the flow, perhaps that was the best outcome. The future of the Soul Society wouldn't necessarily take a turn for the worse. Judging by the state of the living world, this Emperor was no fool. He was simply so ambitious that he could not allow the old order to continue existing. Right now, the Soul Society is incredibly weak. Restoring its strength should be the top priority. The Emperor spoke. Understood. By the way, the Emperor suddenly opened his eyes and turned his gaze toward her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Captain Anohana, you hail from the medical division. You must have extensive knowledge of the human body, don't you?" "I know a thing or two," Anohana replied, uncertain of his intent. The fundamental difference between long-lived beings and mortals was that for those with eternal lifespans, worldly desires tended to fade over the ages. But this Emperor, he was barely in his 20s. He was at an age when desires burned most fiercely. She met his gaze, one that seemed intent on stripping away every layer of fabric she wore, and let out a silent sigh. It seemed that she was destined to become a mere plaything. And at the hands of this Emperor, she would be toyed with for a long, long time. Siriidii, 6th Division. Obito felt dazed, his thoughts hazy. The spatial rift had already closed, yet before him, a group of people had suddenly appeared. He couldn't remember what had just happened, no matter how hard he tried to recall, a sharp pain stabbed through his head. These people were covered in blood, as if they had just survived a life-or-death battle. But, his lieutenant, Abarai Rinji, was nowhere to be seen. Wait, isn't that Urahara Kisuke? Someone in the crowd suddenly recognized them, exclaiming in shock. And Shihoin Yuruchi. Hirako Shinji. They're all criminals from over 100 years ago. Obito carefully examined them, 10 people in total. His grip on his Nichiren blade tightened as he remained alert. Who are you? The group glanced around, as if confirming something, before some of them collapsed onto the ground, utterly exhausted. A man wearing a green Haori finally spoke. You must be the new 6th Division captain. Before he could say more, a shadowy figure suddenly appeared atop a distant building. Urahara's expression darkened instantly upon seeing the newcomer. Shinji's face twisted in shock and fury as he shouted. Aizen. Biological Science Research Institute. The place had undergone a complete transformation since the last time Tobiama had been here. Although Kabuto was still young, he now carried an air of maturity and steadiness that made him seem much older. Despite his own growth, Kabuto still held deep respect for this predecessor. So, when Tobiama made his request, he agreed without hesitation. I've never attempted soul separation before, Kabuto admitted, looking at Tobiama. It's not going to be easy. I know. That's exactly why I returned to Konoha, to attempt it. Kabuto fell into thought, his gaze landing on the delicate-looking boy lying inside the glass chamber. After a moment, he couldn't help but ask, this child's soul is malformed, but he is already an independent entity. Have you considered that forcibly separating his soul might kill his current consciousness? Inside the chamber, Shiro couldn't hear their conversation. He simply looked around curiously at the various instruments surrounding him. Kabuto continued, between the two fused souls, is there one that's particularly important to you? Tobirama's expression remained unchanged, as cold and rigid as ever. He merely said, begin the preparations. His gaze shifted to the boy within the transparent chamber. For a brief moment, a ripple of emotion flickered through his deep, lake-like eyes. But Tobirama was always cold-hearted enough, and, more importantly, he believed himself to be rational enough. Just then, however, the boy inside the glass chamber suddenly froze, his expression going blank as his face lost all focus. A moment later, his body tensed, and a pained groan escaped his lips. Ugh, ah. Kabuto's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't even done anything yet. None of the instruments had been activated, he had only just scanned the boy's body. Sensing something was wrong, Kabuto immediately opened the chamber. Tobirama stepped forward before anyone else, just as Shiroyo let out a trembling voice. Master. His eyes flickered between clarity and emptiness, his expression twisting between dazed confusion and agonizing pain. Tobirama quickly examined his body but found nothing unusual. Kabuto, realizing something, hurriedly grabbed a pair of glasses from the nearby table. Then, he witnessed a scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. Inside the boy's body, two fused souls of different colors were being violently torn apart, their shapes constantly shifting as they struggled against each other. But what truly shocked Kabuto was that one of the pure-colored souls was connected to a massive black shadow. That shadow was enormous. Kabuto, wearing his soul-seeing glasses, instinctively looked upward, only to find the shadow stretching across the entire space, piercing through the walls and engulfing the sky above the research institute. At that moment, he understood. This shadow was forcibly tearing at the boy's soul, attempting to sever a part of it and claim it entirely. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. The sight before him was far beyond his comprehension. I must report this to His Majesty. No. His Majesty has probably already sensed it. As this thought formed, Kabuto instinctively turned to leave. But just as he took his first step, his mind exploded with a deafening boom, and everything went dark. Kabuto. Tobirama's expression changed drastically, his voice sharp with urgency as he called out. At that moment, the boy lying atop the now open glass chamber let out a weak, pained voice. Master. Master. His breathing grew rapid, his expression twisting in agony. I don't want to. Exclusive access, all novel on Patreon. Genshin Impact Complete Novel, Naruto Birdcage Complete Novel, Overlord Complete Novel. From the Apocalypse 100+ ch, Fairy Tail Destiny Complete Novel, Genshin Impact Eerie Tave at 300+ ch.